Got your attention? Listen up. Saying a movie or a TV show isn't good explicitly because it includes gay, trans, or any queer characters is not a valid criticism. Here's some examples of valid criticisms. I didn't like the cinematography. Didn't work for me. I wasn't a fan of the soundtrack. The music, the score, it took me out of the moment. Those character motivations, they weren't great. They didn't work for me. Those are examples of valid criticisms. Here's examples of invalid criticism. I don't like that movie because it's got a gay person in it. I can't believe they put a trans character in that movie. Just awful movie. Can you believe they put a rainbow flag on the wall of that character's bedroom? That's really woke. Those aren't criticisms, they're bigotry. Homophobia, transphobia, queerphobia in general, those are all examples of that. Gay people exist, so erasing us from the world is bigotry. Do better.
Just, Jesus.
These weirdos, these psychopaths in Hollywood simply are so far over the line. Remember when this started out with Ghostbusters 2016? That's really where a lot of people started to realize what was going on. And then we got into The Last Jedi. We are now so far over.
Okay, hold on. I am famously known for not liking either of those movies. And I'm sitting here going, what the fuck is he talking about? Nothing about The Last Jedi that was really the most hated element of it had to do with Rey. It was mostly the hate was about Luke. Mm-hmm. Really, and about like the dumbing down of Poe and Finn. And, you know, people got mad at Admiral Holdo and the whole fucking Admiral Akbar thing. And I mean, there's so much. Rey was not even really part of that equation. Okay. Now, Ghostbusters 2016, again, was about the response from the studio.
We in the initiative know that watching our content causes YouTube to shove these channels in your face. And we know that the 3 dots maneuver doesn't help much, if at all. So from now on, we'll be linking to several third-party add-ons designed for one thing: chud blocking. I mean, you can block whatever you want. But in this case, you can be sure that the only time you'll ever hear from these parasites of film and pop culture will be when organized chaos turns their deranged backward logic on them to highlight their hypocrisy, or when Willis Credia takes their bizarre narratives about the box office to task. There are blockers for Chrome, Firefox, and even one for Opera. Do you use Opera? Who uses Opera? They're rated pretty highly, and crucially, they're free. We're calling this Operation Chud Block, and we're calling on you to take part. Operation Chud Block is go.
The only way that you can really stop this kind of thing is to arouse public opinion. It's very upsetting. It has a bad moral effect.
Forced adversity.
When I was a kid, it was too much supper. Now it's comic books.
I'll burn them tomorrow.
Bad, B-A-D-D, bothered about Dungeons and Dragons.
Ask yourself, what's more terrifying, fear or the frightened?
I think there ought to be a law against them. Tonight I'm going to show you why.
I think there ought to be a law against them, and who am I talking about? Well, talking about Morgan, talking about Ryan. Ought to be a law against you. You're so awesome. There ought to be a law against it.
Well, when they say be gay, do crime, you know who they're talking about.
Yep, it's true. It's written about you. That was a forced adversity they did against you. I remember that.
It is, yep, exactly me, specifically.
Because, is it really a crime to be sexy? Really? Really?
Apparently so, or people are very upset by it. Oh, yes, Gadfly, we are live.
Oh, yeah. We're doing it live. Doing it. Great topic. Big Canuck, hello to everyone. Oh. Canadian friend, huh? All right. I guess you're allowed. Normally we don't allow Canadians, but no, I'm kidding. Totally kidding. Yeah, thanks for being here. This is an exciting episode. By the way, Ryan, how you doing, man?
Hello, I'm pretty good, thanks. Good to be here again.
Hey, here's the thing. I swear that's not me creating opportunities for myself to say that. It's not. I swear.
Excuse me.
And it is chud clobbering time, except we're doing it, back in the past. Okay.
These are like the original proto chuds.
Yeah, proto comic book chuds for sure. So we're going to get into the inspiration for this podcast. At least how it started for me was with this topic, and I was fascinated with it. I remember, getting comic books at like 8, 9, 10 years old, and I would just like study every square inch of the covers and everything. And I just remember seeing the code on them and being like, what does that even mean? Like, I kind of assumed as a kid that it must be like a quality thing. Like, this comic is good enough. Somebody read this and said, this is a really good comic. We're putting our seal of approval on it. And I wondered who that was, but whatever. I thanked them. And then I wondered, sometimes they were really wrong too. I didn't get it. But yeah, of course, got older, looked into it. I don't know how, with this topic in particular, I don't know how much is common knowledge. Does everybody know who Fredric Wertham was? Does everybody know what the code was? I don't know. What do you guys think?
I don't know that everybody does.
I think if you're interested in comics, you're more likely to, but then probably after a certain age as well, because the age we are now, it's probably the case. But I don't know if younger comic fans are necessarily aware.
Well, we've got Gadfly, who's Canadian. We've got Ryan, who's from Wales, and not everyone had to deal with American Comics Code issues.
True.
No, but we did get all the American comics, so we did sort of have to deal with them.
True, yeah, right. Except they just like take the Captain America comics and just like recolor it with like the, British flag or whatever. Is that how that works?
No. In fact, our Captain Britain run was very successful under Alan Moore, one of his early writing roles. So.
I think that's probably the successful run of Captain Britain. No offense to Captain.
Look, don't.
It was hard to live up to anything else after that. It was
right. You start with Alan Moore, and there's some really good Captain Britain runs out there. But
are there?
I think Captain Britain MI13 is one of my favorite, short run series. I've been enjoying the Krakoa age Captain Britain stuff.
Oh yeah, Krakoa, basically everything is peak comics to me.
My My only issue with the Krakoan Age Captain Britain stuff is that we're on like the third iteration of it. And at least since X of Swords, it's kind of been the same plot and kind of a lot of the same bad guys. And it's getting a little repetitive, but
yeah. I mean, I haven't read them because honestly, that's like the one kind of area of X-Men lore, and including the Krakoan era, that just doesn't resonate with me too much. The whole magic, stuff. I mean, X of Swords was fine. It's good. It's fun event, but yeah.
But you put Apocalypse and Betsy Braddock on a cover, and I'm like, well, I have to check this out now. What the fuck are they doing? And
right. Yeah, I mean, the stuff that involve that's really the best thing about the Krakoan era is just like these, look who's on a team together,
Right.
Apocalypse is being, guiding some person, some young mutant, and he's not doing it in a manipulative way. That's amazing.
No. Good guy Apocalypse.
Yep. Oh my God, Apocalypse just saved all of mutant kind. Crazy.
Yep.
And then he went to go be with his people. But anyway, spoiler.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're not talking about Krakoan X-Men today, although we probably could do an entire podcast
we could
about
just talk about Krakoan X-Men all day. That's fine.
I think that there is one or two that do that, by the way, because there's so much going on. But yeah, we are going to get into the Comics Code. How did it start?
Aww.
Why did it start? Who was involved? How did it play out? What did it affect? It affected a lot. I think you might be surprised if you haven't looked into it, like how much it's had played a role, and not just in comics either. But first,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, you can go ahead.
Well, I think it's important to remember, just sort of a starting point, that like when you're talking about the 40s and 50s, comics was the big media, right? Because it was accessible. You could take it everywhere. A lot of veterans read comics. A lot of people in the service read comics. Elvis was a big comics guy. So
And I think the main thing that I think full disclosure, we've done this episode already, Morgan and I. Because we were originally doing this podcast as like a recorded thing where I would edit it down to just the best stuff. And then, hold on one second, sir.
Well, we were censored by the Comics Code Authority.
See, we were doing a recording of it so that what just happened wouldn't happen. where my neighbor was being so loud that I had to mute the fucking microphone. Anyway, so we recorded it twice, as in 2 sessions when we only planned to do it once. It was episode 3 that we recorded. So the first one was the one with Ryan as our guest, who we eventually indentured into being a co-host. And then what was episode 2? Was Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And then we did the Comics Code, and we got so in the weeds on it, Morgan and I, because we're both comics fans. And at that point, we had not really established a way to do the podcast where we're kind of keeping it within some boundaries, and we were also learning about certain things as we recorded. And we got really engrossed, and just it was fun. It was just a fun thing, and wanted to do it again, because I definitely don't think that I did it justice, to be honest. So
that was our dress rehearsal.
That was a dress rehearsal, but this does intersect with a recent topic that we did, specifically that Ryan did. So cultural climate is something to keep in mind. As far as what was going on in the 50s, culturally,
We're back in that period of where the MAGA people want to go back to.
Yeah, except for the taxes part. They don't want to pay
except for
those
the taxes part. And the separation of church part, separation of church and state.
True. Yeah.
That was still a thing.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm sure as we'll go into it, we'll start to see some ways that it overlaps with McCarthyism. But just to kind of give us a few minutes before, because usually more people show up a little bit later, and I want to give people a chance to show up. So I've got a video here, but it's relevant, and it's one of my old videos actually, and it is really the starting point for the podcast.
This
even
is the
though
secret origin of.
I mean, secret if you would consider it's publicly available on my YouTube channel, I guess. But
secret.
If you listen to episode 0 of over on the Force Adversity page or uploaded on Spotify or whatever, you heard a bit about that, like how there's a chain of events that took place, and that chain of events started with this video. And we probably won't watch the whole thing. I'll probably cringe too much and want to turn it off. But
Forced adversity.
In the early 1950s, a confluence of conservative fear-mongering launched a destructive socio-political phenomenon that crept into the fabric of society and thrives today, despite evidence against the claims, despite reason, and decades of their doomsaying being shown as false. The now disgraced psychologist Fredric Wertham began his baseless crusade against the popular medium of comic books in 1948. In the spring of 1954, the infamous Seduction of the Innocent was published.
Well, what are you doing, past Dane? You're just like giving away the fucking secrets of the episode. No, but like one thing that I wanted to say is that I definitely, through the first recording of the episode that we did, so at this point, when I did this video, I still had this same view of Wertham that I'd had for pretty much since I learned about him originally. And then as we did the episode, or I prepared for that episode before, I think we recorded that, in November?
Yeah.
I kind of realized that it wasn't such a black and white thing. And we'll get into that later, but just if you see Wertham as he was the guy that hated comics and hated fun, and he was just a crazy fucking person. Well, he might have been kind of crazy, because there's some weird quotes that I found by him, but like essentially, or he said once that comic books are they're like, I don't know, something about, basically he said they're worse than Hitler.
Right.
Something he said. But otherwise,
he said something to that effect, and it's yeah. But he's an interesting figure historically.
True. You know what? So the point of it is, we'll skip past the comics code part, because the point of it is that I made this connection, kind of loose connection. It wasn't based on anything except just like, well, they both were in the 50s, that, the comics code kind of had the same vibe as McCarthyism, right? Like nowhere that I've found is like McCarthyism or like this Red Scare, specifically mentioned in, comics code propaganda or anything like that, or pre-comics code propaganda, but just the vibe of it. You know what I mean? It's just a similar vibe of, and that's because at the time there was like this cultural push to, I guess, the powers that be were pushing for culture to kind of, get in line. Wanted it to be very rigid and a specific thing. And yeah.
Well, I think also there's the tendency when there's problems occurring to look elsewhere rather than the source. And the easiest thing to do is to blame something else and ban it, or try to ban it.
We can't address systemic issues. We have to blame checks what the new thing is for today.
And so one thing we talked about in the original recording was what were the systemic issues that were going on that really don't get talked about much in the 50s, because it's just seen as such a idyllic time, right? But it was post World War II. You had a shitload of men coming back from a really gruesome war where they had
or not coming back at all.
That right. And so like the ones that did come back, though, they got married, got jobs, had kids, but what they didn't have going on was like any kind of mental health care. There was no
got married, had kids, got drunk, abused the person they married, abused those kids.
Yep. And so that's when you started seeing what was termed child delinquency, which was basically, it ranged from your kid is late to class sometimes to, he's getting in fights or smoke some reefers or whatever. And so these ideas about like controlling what children are doing, rather than looking at the source of the problems, that got really popular. And, the main thing about comics that were really distinct was that is the first time that kids could choose their own entertainment. They didn't need any say-so from parents. You know what I mean? They could just, if they had a dime or whatever, go to the newsstand, buy one, whatever they wanted to buy. And that, I think, freaked out a lot of teachers and parents and authority types.
It sort of coincided or overlapped with the birth of the teenager, because I think what a lot of people, certainly something that I didn't appreciate up until reasonably recently, certainly in my adulthood, is that there didn't used to be such a thing as teenagers.
Right.
They were children and adults.
Yeah.
And you were either one or the other. And so there was no teenage culture. And you look at today, like the sort of target advertising market is late teens is when it starts. And that's just not a thing that existed. So, yeah, it's these different confluences of events of the Second World War, where kids born before the war might not have their fathers come back. Those fathers that did come back, or those people who did come back and then become fathers, or those fathers who came back were changed. Some very different, and a lot of stepkids as well because of this terrible war.
Yeah. Yeah. So you basically are seeing a lot of social shifts, begin that eventually would become, kind of commonplace now. Step parents, stepchildren, so on and so forth, and it was just a time of things are changing as they always are, but you had people in power that really, really didn't want them to, and they wanted them to be a specific thing. So I think that's one of the reasons that we did a whole month on the 50s, right?
Yeah. Because even the whole impact of World War II on how we get the comics code figured into, how we ended up with Jackie Robinson being able to play, Major League Baseball. That same major event was sort of the impetus to a lot of societal upheaval and change, because for some weird reason, a bunch of people died or were horrifically injured mentally and physically. So that messes up your whole society in a bunch of fun and exciting ways.
But don't you talk about it? Don't be a pansy. You keep those feelings to yourself.
Right. You're not allowed to have feelings.
Dev, you really got to stop just kind of telling everybody what. I mean, I know Morgan made a joke there, but you're basically just kind of, people aren't going to hang around if you just tell them everything that happens. Anyway, so the point of this video was to kind of just say that I saw a connection there. It wasn't like, here's a academic reason to suggest these are the same or anything like that. It was really just vibes. And then like a few days later, someone who
dumb motherfucker.
Are you calling me a dumb motherfucker?
No, I'm calling the person you're about to talk about some dumb motherfucker.
You mean the inspiration, the muse of this podcast? You're calling it? No.
It's like an idiot savant.
He stumbled upon some, a good idea, or stumbled upon inspiring a good idea. So, our muse, podcast muse, Ethan Van Sciver, he apparently saw my video, and at that point, though, he had stopped mentioning me. Although he would talk about what I had talked about. And this was the most glaring, example of that, because he was tweeted a couple of threads about, first was like the comics code and why it was actually a good thing. And, Wertham was onto something. He was right. So on and so forth. We need a new comics code, he said. And we're going to get into that toward the end of the episode. Just kind of like these freaking calls for the return to something like the comics code.
We need a new comics code with hookers and blackjack.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's so bizarre. The people that want a code are like, you really only want certain things from the code, and we're going to talk about what those certain things are for sure. But And then, there's that thread, and then there was another thread, followed up where he talked about, the Red Scare and McCarthyism and how, like, actually there really were commies and power and blah, blah, blah. He was, McCarthy was onto something. Just taking these two disgraced figures and saying, no, everybody's wrong about them. And he did those within a couple of days. And then the thing that really gives it away is he said, comics bread tubers like to talk about the code as if it was an all bad thing or whatever. And look, I don't consider myself a bread tuber. I didn't then. But if anybody was going to fall under that category, I think it would be me, right?
Who else is he talking about?
So, yeah, it just kind of was like, wait a second. So this guy that I know, he's a fascist. Everything he supports and pushes for is lines up perfectly with fascism. He's saying that these things were good, and, he's defending them. He seems kind of desperate to defend them while not mentioning me by name because, he presumably doesn't want his audience actually looking at my content. And it kind of was like, well, I guess that's leading me to, that led me to think that this is a good idea, something I need to think more about, which led me to thinking more about just the general idea of, moments in history when culturally, socially, there was this kind of inorganic or irrational, kind of reaction to something, whether it's in pop culture, just, trends in fashion or whatever it is. We could be talking about the Salem witch trials, which we will talk about eventually, or, one of the things we've already talked about. But yeah, so that's how the podcast was born, and that's what that video is about. But
I got it. Complete tangent. October is Witchcraft Month.
Oh, yeah.
We in?
Yeah. Well, I mean, probably witchcraft and Satan.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there is enough examples of the witchcraft stuff that we could do an episode on, but we got to get some Satan in there.
Well, yeah. How do you do witchcraft without Old Goatface?
We got to
give him an invite, talk to his PR guy.
Yep. Yeah, and Jack Kirby was in serious action for real. He saw some shit.
A hero in more than one way.
For sure. So yeah, you guys ready to get into the meat of it?
Hit it.
So let's look at it. Oh, Ryan, were you gonna say something?
No, sorry, I was just agreeing.
Got a couple of minutes of a little propaganda video here, just to kind of give you a vibe of what this whole thing felt like as they were pushing for the code. But then we're going to get into the timeline of it.
When I was a boy and played with the gang, we did a lot of things. We roasted potatoes and went on expeditions. We tipped over garbage cans now and then. We wrote nasty remarks about the teacher on the sidewalk. But we never spent an afternoon sitting around like this, reading. What a wonderful thing this would be if they were reading something worthwhile, something that would stimulate their desires to build and to grow. But they're not reading anything constructive. They're reading stories devoted to adultery, to sexual perversion, to horror, to the most despicable of crimes. The corpse that came to dinner. One of the wonderfully appealing things about children is that they haven't yet come to the age where reality and unreality are divorced.
I just want to stop and highlight the beauty of that sentence, especially, in light of adults today. And
yeah, I want to sit this guy down and be like, let me introduce you to Spring 2020 Facebook.
QAnon, or basically anything that the Republicans believe.
Yeah, right.
Let me introduce you to the idea of trickle-down economics, sir. Yeah, that's crazy. And wow. I mean, I've seen this before, but every time I'm just like, there's so much subjective stuff in there that just gets, passed over. And I know I talk about that a lot on the channel, just like really think about what's subjective and what's not, right? Because he's just saying, it's tasteless and it's blah, blah, blah.
It's such a weird intro as well. Like the first few lines, like when we were kids, we used to roast potatoes and push over garbage cans, and now these kids are reading.
Right, like.
I mean, obviously, he goes on to explain how that sentence isn't the most insane thing anybody's ever said, but surely the scriptwriter could have been like,
yeah,
should we just move these bits around a little bit so it doesn't like suggest, like you're saying, pushing over garbage cans is better than reading?
Yeah,
or writing, calling your teacher a bitch on the sidewalk or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, reading is worse than light vandalism. What? You're going to have to really sell me on that. And then he goes on to not sell me on that.
No, and then to talk about these kids aren't reading anything that will enrich them, but they're reading about adultery and horror and what was the other one? Depravity, something like that. And I'm thinking,
well, there's actually perversions, which means a specific thing.
Yes.
And we're going to get into that when we get into the provisions of the code.
Ooh.
And how some of the language, we'll get into it. But basically, really, a great lesson you can take from this episode is how language is used to, kind of obfuscate intention.
But what stood out to me there was that when he talks about that, I assume he's talking about classic literature, which is full of all that stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Classic literature such as Dracula and Frankenstein.
But kids don't want to read that stuff. That's the thing. Kids wanted to read comics.
I wanted to read both.
Yeah, I mean that's a generalization. It's not even true. But I mean, it was just popular, and kids could buy them for a dime and stuff them in their pocket, and just freak people out.
Well, just think if you wanted to read a book full of violence and depravity, you could probably buy a Bible. It's full of that shit.
The Bible, yeah. I mean, the difference is that a lot of times these, especially EC comics, who we're going to talk about quite a bit, there was some kind of, I guess, tongue-in-cheek message behind a lot of stuff. You know what I mean? Like there would be some reveal or whatever, and like it would only a rigid, kind of conservative-minded adult would see this stuff and go, this is taking itself very seriously,
Right. Or if in the instance it does take itself seriously, the message it has is unpleasant to an American conservative.
Yeah, that's really what it boils down to.
We'll get there.
We will. So yeah, let's see. It goes on to describe it colorfully some more, as if it's like, oh, look at this kid. Look what he's doing. He's going to stab this tree. Yeah, here's the part what I wanted to get to. So this is, this guy sits these kids down and he asks, about their experience. And like, what? I mean, look, the kids speak for themselves, okay? You going to argue with what these kids are saying?
I love the music.
I try always to contact the most highly qualified experts on the subject, so let's talk to some experts on comic books. You want to give me your name, son?
David Freeman.
Like, the level of fucking, he thinks he's being snide with that.
Yeah.
How old are you?
11.
Tell me how comic books make you feel, Dave.
Well, they don't make me feel too good. A couple of times I read a comic book, I threw up.
Okay. Also, like, here's I threw up. Okay. Well, food poisoning. I'm sorry, kid. Whatever. But like, just the snide, like, oh, that the 11-year-old is an expert on comics. This is the 50s, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Superman came out 20 some years ago at this point.
Well, yeah, 38, 39, yeah. Well, not quite 20, so like more like 12, 15.
15.
I mean, you also at the time you had, working at EC, you had, Wally Wood,
right?
I mean, like there were some amazing comics, which we're going to look at one of them in particular later.
Yep.
So, like, if your idea of comics being just superheroes and like, just fantasy, power fantasy nonsense, whatever. I call it nonsense when I actually love superhero stuff.
I was gonna say, like,
there's all kinds of other comics, and it's not just a new phenomenon that other types of comics have existed.
Right.
It's just, in popular, imagination, I suppose it's been portrayed as superheroes.
Look, I think one thing to reach out to a crowd of people who think American comics is just superhero comics. A lot of people think of anime as a genre rather than a medium. Like anime is a style of product. It is not a genre of product. There's anime of all countless different flavors and themes and settings.
That's so weird because I'm not even an anime fan and I understand that. So like,
and comics is the same way, right? Like,
it really is. It's a form of sequential art essentially, much like manga, right?
Yeah, manga is also sequential art with panels. Yeah.
Incidentally, I have kind of a rundown of the history of comic books. So, the first comic books, we'll never know what they were because they were written on, walls back in the Stone Age.
Nice.
If you're talking about sequential art that tells stories, often in that case, it was kind of, mythologized stories, right? And then, Chinese scrolls, ancient Chinese scrolls, the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, they told stories and legends that way. So really no different than, what it is now. It's outsized stories in a lot of cases, just kind of mythical beings doing mythical shit. And then there are still somehow people that want to, portray comics as just being for kids. And they're like, they don't matter or whatever.
No, because their mythical hero you have to talk to in a cold stone building.
Well, I don't even think they were originally marketed to children, were they? They were written as sort of pulp stories.
Yeah.
That were quick reads, basically, and they evolved from there into, again, for adults, just something quick to read.
Right. Well, and I don't even think that. I think when he is saying they're for children, right, and calling me 11-year-old an expert, I think it's to dismiss the fact that like comics are broadly popular with a wide range of demographics.
Yep.
Because they're cheap, accessible, they're written to be easy to read, have the art, they travel well.
Well, and not to, get too ahead of ourselves, but like, it seems like there are people today that try to do that, except they actually call themselves comic book fans and creators even. It is weird. Yeah, just look for, side-eye anybody that's trying to, downplay or undermine the significance of comic books as if there's some passing trend or they're, whatever.
They're a passing 100-year-old trend. Got it.
Yeah, which stems from a passing, basically as long as humanity has been around, form of storytelling.
Well, yeah, because I think the thing to remember as well is up until recently, most people couldn't read. And so the only way to get messages across was either through somebody who could read, which is why everybody went to church, or through drawings and pictures and illustrations. Our famous one is the Bayeux Tapestry, which depicts the events of the Battle of Hastings, which is essentially a comic book.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. The fact that literacy is not it's not a super old thing as far as like common literacy.
Yepers.
Yeah. Let's see what we got. Okay. So, yeah, as we were talking about, if you're a fan of comics or even comic-inspired films, it behooves us to acknowledge the history of the medium and the many amazing humans and a few awful ones, the incredible moments of bravery and cowardice, and those clashing that played pivotal roles in getting the medium to where it is today. And as we talked about, this topic is the fabric of what makes this podcast, as seen in the design aesthetic, and our new logo. In case you haven't seen that. Oh, I thought it was on screen. What happened?
No. Pop it up.
Where'd it go?
Flash the bling. I'm too white to say that.
Beauty of live streaming. People.
Yay!
Beauty of live streaming when you do like 3 live streams a week, and like otherwise I would be much more prepared for any one of them, but there we go, up in the corner. So was Dr. Fredric Wertham a fascist goon who had a hate boner for fun? Were comics getting a bit too yikesy for kids? Was the code entirely bad? The story of the code is a lesson to us all to not assume every issue is in black and white, even if many of the comic issues at the time were. And this story will show us that history's heroes are not always remembered as well as its villains. And I hope that the hero we highlight today will inspire you as he's inspired myself and Morgan when we did our trial run recording of this topic months ago. And this intersects, the story of the CCA, the Comics Code Authority, intersects with several topics that we have covered and will cover.
Yep.
Including the Red Scare, bigotry, which is going to be a repeated villain, and the repeated attempts by less enlightened folks to use popular culture and usually cynical. Wait a second. I wasn't prepared for this either. I'm going to get ready. Pretend I'm just, pretend I'm entertaining you while I do this. And and the usually cynical tactic that we've seen weaponized in nearly every topic that we've covered, what I'm going to start calling the Helen Lovejoy fallacy.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
No.
Worth it.
Worth it. Yeah.
Are you saying no that I can't do that? Like I can't, you'd make that a thing, or just no? You
no.
won't
My
think
response to the Helen Lovejoy fallacy is no, because I will not think of the children.
I mean, I do. I have
annoying.
a kid. I think of the children, and I tend to think that a lot of the things that people say that about are fine, and these are often the same people that say like just objectively harmful shit about things that are harmful for kids.
Right. I think that if we have to stop now, like, okay, so for comics, right, of all of the issues of the day that might be harming kids, this is the one we're going to address. That's weird. But
yeah,
I digress.
Well, I mean, it was back then. It was comics. Now it's I guess
all sorts of stuff.
Trans people. Like
yeah.
It's always something, folks. Somebody ought to make a podcast about it.
They really should.
Anyway.
With an international cast.
So they do this to try to solidify a specific, prescriptive, essentialistic design for everyone who wishes to engage in society. And while there's obviously a need for social norms, these should be based on mitigating harm and optimizing well-being of people, not based on the moralizing of the loudest charlatans or those who happen to have their hands on the levers of power. Within the story of the Comics Code, we'll hear some examples that perfectly highlight this, and we'll learn how the exact same impulse to control what should be unbound, consensual sexuality, human expression, imagination, artistic experimentation, and for fuck's sake, the ability of our children to have some degree of agency in who they are, to not be seen as perverted little monsters who will stab, shoot, behead, or degrade simply by engaging with fiction. The attitudes underlying the Comics Code never went away, merely went dormant until conditions were ideal for their awakening. Many of the things we take for granted about comics have their origin in the code and its effects. But most importantly, many of the general cultural norms and social expectations outside of comics that we assume simply are today did too. Generally acceptable by the powers that be, the range of expressions of human condition, more to the point, the limited range in all forms of artistic consumer products from TV to film, video games, even social media, as if handed down by the firmament. These were all introduced, itemized, immortalized, and began to harden in the social bedrock thanks to the code. One thing is certain, the comics medium, and by extension the film industry, would not be the same if the code never existed. I'll go so far as to say that if that is true, considering the influence pop culture has on us all, we must also assume that society at large would not be the same. And that's not to put a value judgment on that either way. We may have our ideas about how that would have played out, for better or worse. This is the timeline we're in. Considering the increasingly common question of, are we doomed, proposed by anyone with an apt analysis of conditions today, the way to push the eventual answer toward no is to understand, as we said in episode 0, how we got here. Yeah. Thank you for letting me read that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so the Comics Code was anti-woke is a title I came up with just the other day, and I was like, why did it take me so long to think of that? Because it was. I mean, as we're going to learn, so much.
It really is. Well, no, I think part of it is that more people are have awakened to the fact that woke really is a word that means whatever you want it to be if you want to be mad about a specific amount of empathy in the world.
Or in some cases, just any whatsoever.
Yeah.
See, we touched on the fact that this is related to McCarthyism just in, like I was saying, vibes. But, it really was a overall attempt, whether, coordinated or not, I don't know, just to corral humans, to do what the government needs, what the powers that be benefit from, and only that. And in light of that, what came before the code that really influenced the code a lot was the Hays Code, with the film industry.
The fucking Hays Code.
So what do you guys know about the Hays Code?
It sucks. I know that it is probably the example of the myth that Hollywood is liberal, right? Like it is old and far-reaching because it originates in the 20s, I think.
Yeah, I think it was the 30s or so.
And it's the same sort of like moral code. I think it was even written by a preacher of some sort.
If I was a good host, I would know that. Well, we are going to do an episode on the Hays Code, so there's no point in getting too deep into it anyway.
Yeah, we will definitely cover the Hays Code soon.
Soonish.
Well, yeah, I know a little bit more about it in the fact that pre-Hays Code films are fascinating because it really dispels the myth that people at the time were repressed.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time it's similar to the view of the Victorian England being repressed, where actually no, they just did it all behind closed doors. It wasn't out in the open.
They did it all behind closed doors too.
Well, yeah. I mean, the amount of Victorian erotica there is just astounding, and the various different devices that doctors were actually prescribing for hysteria, as they called it, are the same devices now that a lot of women have in their homes that are for, let's say, non-medical use. So yeah, they had the pre-Hays Code films vary wildly. I mean, you look at the Universal horror films, the early ones, they were all pre-Hays, and there's nothing that modern sensibilities would find shocking about them. But that's probably why they were basically allowed to continue making those films, because they weren't really that scary.
They're kind of grandfathered in.
Well, no, I don't even think it was that. I just think they didn't really break any of the code, not to any sort of degree. Whereas there were other pre-Hays films where there was nudity in some of the early silent films. Obviously, no swearing. It's very difficult to swear in a silent film unless one of the little cards pops up. But yeah, nudity, violence was definitely more prevalent pre-Hays Code, and so yeah, the way it was brought in sort of basically ended all of that, and really just pushed it behind closed doors again.
Yeah,
so
right.
It makes the period sort of from the 30s to when it was replaced seem much more chaste than it actually was.
Interesting. Yeah, well, we'll have to definitely get into that more, because I guess I did hold that false notion. But yeah, so the general information about the Hays Code is is actually called that's the colloquial name. It's the Motion Picture Production Code, which, the Hays Code, the Motion Picture Production Code, now it's been morphed into the MPAA, which has its own problems, and we're definitely going to cover that one day too. Maybe we should do like a 2 week in a row thing, like do the Hays Code. Then anyway, we're not going to do production talk now.
Yeah, right. Well, that's for off air or for later.
So it was applied to most major studio pictures released from 1934 to 1968. It was a self-censorship system. And that's, an important distinction, that there wasn't like this and the Comics Code. Neither one of them were direct censorship by the government. It was the threat of censorship. So like a secondary form. Basically like if you don't do something to, regulate your shit, we're going to do it. And, maybe that was the better option. I don't know. So in 1968, it was replaced with the MPAA. And the reason it worked for as long as it did was because the studio system. Hollywood was controlled by several large studios that could essentially decide how to make films that made money. And for a long time, that meant sticking to the code. It had a lot of rules, just like the Comics Code, that, well, first of all, it influenced culture then, and then influenced the Comics Code. And then as I read them, you'll start to see how these really probably cemented a lot of things in place that, we're still dealing with. So there was regulations against the depiction and discussion of adulterous sex, various other political rules. Interesting, huh? Like keep politics out of our movies kind of thing. I don't know.
Yeah, it's sort of the same. I don't know if that was the stated intent, but that was certainly the undercurrent.
Right. Basically, keep politics that I don't agree with out of the movies is really probably what it was.
Because I remember one thing, because I've read the code in the lead up to some other stuff we've worked on. One of the ones that stuck out is you can't depict white people being enslaved.
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't know about that. I didn't see that one, but that's good to know, because I mean, there's. So this is the main one that I really picked on. Is like, wow, I wonder how much. I can't help but think if not for these provisions in the Hays Code and the Comics Code, where would we be at?
Right.
So the requirement of the Hays Code was that queer characters had to be either villainous or suffer tragic fates.
Yep.
Which, man. That's a little on the nose with how things are being framed today.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's still a problem in media today that is so ingrained in how writing is sort of in how. Well, my ability to have a sentence is bad. Let me back up. It's so ingrained in how popular stories are written that even though it's no longer part of the code, pushback against it is a pretty recent point of view that people have now, that like, hey, maybe we should just depict this whole segment of the population as only capable of being bad or killed.
Right. And it's to the point where you've got a whole little segment of people who and they're not the majority, I don't believe, but they're loud, who I deal with regularly on this channel, who just kind of take for granted that that's the way things should be, because that's just the way things have been. And like, yeah, there's a good example in this little documentary movie that's probably super outdated by now, but it's called This Film Is Not Yet Rated, I think.
Yeah.
Might be. You can watch it, I think, for free on YouTube, although in crappy quality. But like, there is, it's all about the MPAA and how that operates, and trying to get some kind of information out of it is out of the MPAA, at least then, was like trying to, I don't know, rob Fort Knox or whatever. Like,
right,
the people who make up the MPAA are not generally publicly known. They very secretive about their process, about how they decide things, which is a whole problem. And then there was an example that it showed of two movies that came out in the same year. One of them had the suggestion of oral sex with a hetero couple. The other one had pretty much the same suggestion. Like, there wasn't like anything shown or whatever of oral sex with a gay couple, right?
Yep.
With women, lesbians. And the one with the hetero couple was rated R, and the other one would have been rated X, or was rated X or whatever. And literally no difference, except for that, one of the four people was a woman. And it kind of gives you an idea of how this stuff has been seen. Not cool. Let let women, go down on other women. Who cares?
Right. And keep in mind that historically, depictions of lesbians have been more acceptable than depictions of gay men.
True. Oh, the other thing that it does show, though, this is kind of like a more of a just women's issue in general, is that there was 2 examples of movies that came out the same year, and one of them, a guy has an orgasm, and you can clearly tell that's what's happening on his face and how he's acting. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But with a woman, nope, you can't really show that the same way.
Yeah. Can't show the female orgasm. Even
it's a myth, really, but.
Oh,
but I mean, we're talking about fictional movies here, so why not? Sorry.
Damn.
Anyway, so yeah, McCarthyism in the background of all this, and just the general fear of disloyalty.
Someone cancel Dane for that one.
I'm sorry. I got nobody's perfect, right? The general fear of disloyalty, and the fact that like I said, kids could go and buy these for a dime or a nickel or whatever, and parents don't really know what's in them. That freaked them the fuck out. But who it freaked out more than anybody? The Fredric Wertham, Dr. Fredric Wertham, who you might call him I don't know, that era's version of. No, I don't want to go making any comparisons that might not be fair.
I don't think that's fair to him to compare him to some contemporary figures.
Fair. I mean, that's fair.
If I was going to compare him to someone, and even this is kind of a stretch, is the guy who founded the Westboro Baptist Church. Because he did some good, he did some legitimate good things as a lawyer, and then became a crazy person.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
He did some civil rights work as an attorney, and then just became a weirdo.
So, Dr. Fredric Wertham was is Frederick Ignatz Wertheimer. So I guess you kind of did a little shortening of the name. Born in 1895, German-American psychiatrist and author. He had an early reputation as a progressive psychiatrist who treated poor black patients at his clinic at a time of heightened discrimination in urban mental health practice. So basically, he was the guy who black people would go see for mental health treatment when the other clinics just refused to see them, which is a progressive thing, at that time.
Yeah, unfortunately, the treatments weren't that progressive.
Right. Let's not get into the treatments themselves.
Right.
Okay? Maybe some of those, maybe the black people would have been better off if they hadn't. But
I mean, we're even today, mental health is still barely out of the bone saw phase. It's
at least we're not doing lobotomies anymore, right?
True. It's a low threshold.
He authored a definitive textbook on the brain, and his institutional stressor findings were cited when courts overturned multiple segregation statutes, most notably Brown versus Board of Education. So his work played a role in some the defining moment in segregation as far as especially public schooling.
Right.
And so despite that, he remains best known for his concerns about the effects of violent imagery in mass media and the effects of comic books on the development of children. His best known book is Seduction of the Innocent, 1954, which asserted that comic books caused youth to become delinquents. So, he was doing some good stuff, and then he decided, what if I just fucking get it wrong a bit for a while?
Yeah, what if I just lose my goddamn mind?
Yeah, I mean, which really, it's kind of it's not wrong for that he's had that theory, right? It makes sense to be wait a second, how's this new thing that kids are able to buy themselves, off the news rack, and they're carrying them around and they're trading them around and everything. How's this going to affect kids? That's a reasonable question to ask.
Yeah.
But, I think even in 1954, there was already a process in place that you would use to figure that out, and he didn't use it. It's called the scientific method.
I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Heard good things.
I think it might have come around like a couple of years before that or something. I don't know.
Just a smidgen, yeah. Still relatively new.
So the way that he studied this was to basically, he just right off the bat, he was doing it wrong, because he would pick kids that had already been, in trouble. And those were the kids that he decided to test. Kids that's already, getting in fights or whatever it is. And the other thing is that every kid was reading comic books. It's like the same thing as trying to say that some kid does some violent action or whatever nowadays, and you go, well, do you play video games? Yes, it's got to be the video games.
Basically.
Because everybody's doing it. And to even, I don't know how a guy who ends up becoming a psychiatrist and is apparently pretty smart in a lot of areas can overlook that, but
Well, I think this what were called the softer sciences, just like you've said, were really early days. So, I mean, I think, like Morgan said, we still don't understand mental health anywhere near as much as we do physical health. So there were a lot of scientists who, even if they were employing the scientific method, weren't doing it right. Or even if they were trying to, weren't doing it right.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I figured that there's some kind of context that I can't possibly understand very well, being, alive today and not then. But like, yeah, like when I was growing up and I first started learning about the code, being such a comic book nerd and being a child, essentially, I kind of just saw him as the villain. Like he's just an evil guy, apparently, and I held that for way too long.
Yeah. And I think he was very committed to being wrong at the very least.
Yeah. I think in some ways it's worse to be wrong but think you're right than it is to be evil.
In some ways,
yeah. Especially whenever, like, you're like you guys are saying, you're being fair, and like it was kind of a new thing to be studying these things. So like, okay, but I mean, like these days with all the information we have on so many things, to be wrong when there's an abundance of evidence on something, like in the case of genital enthusiast Matt Walsh.
Yeah, he should. I'm going to back up. I believe he knows better. I believe he knows what he is doing, and what he is lying about is a lie. I think he's, in a word, full of shit.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, he does describe himself as a theocratic fascist. So like, you should just always, that's the one thing you can trust about him, I think.
I think that's the only, yeah.
And as I was saying, some people are wrong, but think they're right.
Yeah.
And other people are just evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, not just, I don't want to simplify evil, but some people are evil for money. And
right.
I think saying evil is in an effect is pretty safe. That's how I tend to use it when I say it, which is rare. I don't ever
use
describe
evil.
someone's souls as anything or whatever, but like
No.
there's an effect that you can call evil for sure.
Some people are so greedy that the things that they do are evil.
Indeed. I don't understand it. That's all I'm going to say to that.
Yeah. Moving on.
Moving on. So yeah, let's see. He initially didn't get much traction, right? Like initially, whenever he decided this kind of reminded me of what was her name?
Right. The video
Anita
nasties
Bryant?
lady?
Yeah. Huh?
Oh, Mary Whitehouse.
Mary Whitehouse. Yeah. Whereas like he had this idea that this is something that he felt was a concern about the children. And then at first nobody really gave a shit. And then he wrote his book. He kind of went back to the drawing board, so to speak, and he formulated all his arguments in Seduction of Innocence. And yeah, from there it was all downhill, folks. And that's a good point. It really is. So, Seduction of the Innocent described overt and covert depictions of violence, sex, drug use, and other adult fare within quote-unquote crime comics, a term Wertham used to describe not only the popular gangster murder-oriented titles of the time, but also superhero and horror comics as well. So there he goes, lumping in, 3 different genres with each other. And, like even myself, admittedly, when I think about the comics of the time that were the issue, it was horror comics, because that's kind of what got pushed to the forefront. But that's not what he was just lumping them all together, like all comic books,
right?
In his mind, were just as bad as the others.
Yeah, almost as if it was the combination of words and pictures in that format that was evil,
which is weird.
Yeah,
and not how science is done, believe it or not.
No.
But yeah, he asserted, based largely on undocumented anecdotes, that reading this material encouraged similar behavior in children. And I think that there's some of that still being implied by people that allegedly love comic books today.
Yeah, drawing conclusions from anecdotes rather than hard data. That seems like something that wouldn't happen these days. You wouldn't have thought, would you?
Kind of seems like the thing that, if anything, we could point to being like the downfall of civilization. That might be it. No, I don't want to speak too broadly.
Right.
But,
I mean, then again, like the whole, like, this thing is going to be the downfall of civilization. I hate to be cool with that, but like, if that's all it takes, it probably should.
Maybe we deserve it. Okay.
Yeah,
Fair
like
enough.
if
Let it burn.
it takes that very little thing to make your whole civilization fall, maybe get a better civilization.
So, what were some of the specifics of Wertham's concern? Because there's pictures of him reading comics. You can find it. He's just old ass
He has
dude. just
held
sitting
an
there reading
open
some
comic
comics,
at the very least.
looking like he doesn't. So I guess that is kind of a distinction, and from a lot of the ones that we've covered, right? He actually did do the reading.
Did the homework.
Looked into the material itself instead of like White House, who just never watched a frame of the horror movie she was rambling about. So comics, especially the crime horror titles pioneered by EC Comics, who we're going to be getting into, were not without their gruesome images. There was definitely some stuff there. And I've got a couple of them we can look at real quick. Either you guys ever read any old horror comics?
I have not, no.
No, the oldest I go back to is 70s Werewolf by Night, but
some old Swamp Thing, 70s or 80s.
Well, there's definitely, I'm sure most of you, if you've had any familiarity with this at all, you've seen there's a couple of comic book covers that just kind of became the face of this. One of them is, which the one I don't have here, but if I describe it, you've seen it, you'll know. It's like a man holding an axe, a bloody axe, and then a woman's head. Clearly, he has just decapitated her. But here's this one, which I don't think I'd seen before today, and I'm like, holy shit, man, that is that is rough. So, just a guy
pretty
getting
harsh for a front cover, yeah.
blasted out, yeah. And so, like with that, I can kind of understand the concern, and this is another area that I think I gained some nuanced understanding of the first time we recorded this, which is that there probably should have been some measure of, some degree of like something to keep kids from just buying whatever they wanted, at least in the sense that they had to have consent from their parents or whatever. Of course, that would imply that parents back then gave a shit what their kids thought about anything,
right?
And gave them any kind of agency, which is more or less the root of the problem. But that's rough. But
well, and we don't. The one thing I will say is we don't know. We presume that the ones buying these comics were kids, based on Wertham's take, right? And we know that was wrong.
True.
We know that comics were broadly popular and horror comics most among them, or highest among them. So while kids had access to it, do we know that kids were the ones buying these specific comics, or were they buying cowboy books and cape books and whatever? Like what?
We don't really know. Yeah, because I mean that's the problem whenever you just paint everything with that kind of brush and
right.
There's no room for discussion is the thing, and that's ultimately the problem is like whether or not there was a real issue with what kids were reading. It doesn't matter because you have somebody coming in and saying this is all a problem. We have to do this, some kind of grand sweeping measure to stop this problem.
Right.
There's no conversation to have.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't even seem like there was an attempt to, like they did with pornography, of it being top shelf. Did you have that in the US? The porn mags are always on the top shelf.
Yeah, I mean, we have them. So like they'll have like a black thing in front of the cover. You can see the title usually, but
and then it's higher up.
Yeah, and so it would have been easy. Well, obviously this is pre sort of Playboy and Penthouse, but it would have been the easiest thing in the world to just say this is a top shelf comic, basically. But they seem to go the nuclear route. Well, not the nuclear route necessarily, but whatever's the step down from just banning it completely.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have a fascination in general. I meant to mention this at the beginning that just like the what led me to really be fascinated with the code is just I have a fascination with the history of censorship, especially when it comes to just emerging art forms and such. And so, like one of the I don't want to say my favorite movie, but like it's just a really fascinating movie is People versus Larry Flint. Like I don't give a shit really about porn and stuff like that. I don't like see Larry Flint as a hero or whatever, but there's a lot of discussion in that, and most of it takes place in court, including the Supreme Court, and it's all things that really happened, arguing about whether or not this stuff should be published at all, because for those that aren't aware, what Larry Flint did differently than what Hugh Hefner was doing was. So Hugh Hefner and Playboy, it was basically they would take pictures of naked women standing there, sitting there, whatever. Larry Flint said, but what if we make them open their legs?
That will upset some people.
That was just like a bridge too far. And then the other thing too that he did was where he went afoul was he started publishing satirical kind of stories like that about the one that really became the issue was a story, one-page story about Reverend Jerry Falwell losing his virginity to his mother in an outhouse. And Falwell didn't like it, believe it or not.
What?
Which actually, again, sort of ties in with Mary Whitehouse, because one of her early victories was against a gay magazine that had done a satirical poem about Jesus being gay. And again, very explicit stuff, similar to the Jerry Falwell story. So,
and so like basically they, it wasn't that they wanted that to be, Falwell in particular being the religious, whatever that he was. It wasn't just like I don't want kids to have this. It was like this shouldn't exist. It shouldn't be sold in stores, kind of thing. And the arguments, were in favor of publishing and selling it, or that like a matter of taste. And that's what the really interesting thing to me was in the movie Edward Norton, one of his earlier roles. Argues he's their Larry Flint's attorney, and he gives a pretty compelling couple of speeches about just like your taste is not everyone else's taste, and like sure we should keep these from being accessible to just anyone. But to say that, just because you don't like it, it shouldn't exist is, that's really against freedom of speech.
And I think what's interesting is the sort of generational difference between that era and the era of the sort of Wertham and the Comics Code is that the publishers didn't want to fight that legal battle. It really wasn't worth it to them.
Mm-hmm.
They would rather capitulate than to, because it seems like this is a First Amendment thing.
Yeah. So like with the Hays Code and like with the ESRB later, there is a sleight of hand that goes on with the First Amendment when you're talking about conservative politicians and businesses, wherein you will get these politicians to apply pressure to do what they want. They will come in heavy-handed, and then the industry will capitulate to regulate themselves. And that way, there's no big government regulation, but there is a regulation that is basically whatever these politicians want. But no one has to give ground in specific ways.
And I can see how that works with the film industry, because with films you need theatre houses to show the films,
right?
But it seems a lot harder to regulate a sort of weekly or monthly publication when the outlets they can be sold at are so varied.
Well, and that's a great point, because as we'll get to later, ultimately that very issue is why, the code just very quickly became irrelevant at a certain point. But we'll get there. Sorry, I was kind of killing time so I could find my folder of EC Comics images so we could kind of just take a gander. There were a bunch of horror comics coming out at the time, but all of them followed the three big ones that EC titles that EC was publishing, which were Tales from the Crypt. What else? Vault of Fear, I think it was, or Haunt of Fear, and Crime Suspense Stories, I think that's how you say that. It's all one word. They made it there.
Yeah,
so
there's Vault of Horror, which you've got there.
And it was Crypt of Terror. So you see the thing is there's
yeah,
they kind of just there's a bunch of them. Look, this idea that something is popular, and so let's do a whole bunch of it. That's not new.
That's not new. No.
This is just what capitalism does, where, this is making us money. What if we did more of it? We'd make more money.
If it works, do it. If it keeps working, copy it.
That's it. So here's a cover.
So what year are these particular?
This would have been probably the early 50s.
Early 50s. So
as we'll get to, there's a certain point when it couldn't have been anymore.
Right.
But yeah, so this is you got a guy who's about to. I don't think he's gonna give her this axe for a Christmas, even though it is Christmas. I think he's got some.
It does feel a bit like the setup for a Simpsons joke, though.
I think he's confused about something, and he's going to ask her a question.
Ha.
Perhaps the tree is about to attack her, and he's going for the tree. It's a haunted tree.
So here's one just seems to be about a kid getting run over by a train. I'm not sure what the point is. It's kind of. Oh, here's a mother leaving a baby to drown in the tub. That's cool. It's
the same kid. Is this the origin story for Kenny from South Park?
It's the Kenny origin story.
So if you're familiar with Tales from the Crypt, and you probably are familiar with the Crypt Keeper.
Yeah.
Well, he was just one of three characters that used to kind of host these comics, and he didn't look anything like he does now. So there he is. But the art's really good,
yeah, classic
for what it is.
Art.
Here's a question. Here's a
a
question for you about the Crypt Keeper and how he's presented now.
Mm-hmm.
is that a satirical swipe at capitalism, where even after you're dead, they'll still make you work?
Yep.
It can definitely be seen that way. I would like to know if that's how it was intended, but do you know? Or
No. It was a genuine question. I just thought it's more of what your opinions on it were.
It feels like it.
Seems like it could be.
If they've gone from a vaguely sort of frightening looking man to
well, I mean, if we're going to run with that as being true, then we could say that like all of his corny jokes that he really forced, and his bad puns, that's just like how we have to mass produce crap, and we could go all kinds of directions with that. I think.
There's something in there. There's a video essay in that.
Probably. I'll try to remember that for Halloween. But yeah, this is the one that's generally, at least to me, I feel like it's just the one I've seen the most. Whenever it's talked about in a documentary or whatever, this is the one. It's also one that's directly referenced in the Senate hearings, which we're about to get into. Just taking a quick gander through them here. So what was EC Comics, though? Somebody tell me, please. I don't know. No, I'm kidding. I know.
I was going to say, you got bad news, Dane, about who's doing the episode.
Who's the host here?
Who hosts the host man?
Find my thing. Oh, well, first I have these quotes from Fredric Wertham that, kind of interesting. A natural scientist who had looked over comic books expressed this to me tersely. In comic books, life is worth nothing. There is no dignity of a human being. So he's saying this about all comic books, remember? Not even in Superman?
I was going to say, has he read a Superman book?
Literally saving people's lives?
or a Captain America book, or an early, like an Alan Scott Green Lantern book, or a Captain Marvel book. The Big Red Cheese is pretty popular at this time. Literally Elvis's favorite superhero. Why Elvis dresses the way with the big flashy costumes? Because he was a huge Captain Marvel fan.
So here's another one. The world of the comic book is the world of the strong, the ruthless, the bluffer, the shred deceiver, the torturer, and the thief.
In that those exist in worlds, including our own?
I mean, that's basically as valuable a sentence as describing comics as saying that like they're just full of wokeness and messages and pandering and
right.
like.
I mean,
there are bad people in comics. Well, I have some news about the real world for you, buddy.
I mean, it almost sounds like a line from a 80s metal song.
It kind of does.
Actually, if I was still playing music, I might see about like doing a song just made up completely of Wertham, quotes.
That'd be rad.
Here's a good one. I am convinced that in some way or another, the democratic process will assert itself, and crime comic books will go, and with them, all they stand for and all that sustains them. There's a lot to get into with that one because ultimately, really technically, the democratic process did assert itself and kind of get rid of this stuff. But like, was it really the democratic process or just in name, right?
Yeah, I don't
talking
think
about
it
a guy
actually
who
did.
Huh?
I don't think it did because Congress did the thing where it's like, okay, we're going to drag you before Congress. We're going to wag our finger and tell you to do something about it. But they didn't.
Well, because the comics industry did it first. That was the threat, right? It was just like the Hays Code. It was like, if you don't do something about this, we will.
Sure. And maybe just with the modern perspective of, how many times has Congress dragged executives from Facebook and Twitter before it to tell them we're going to do something about it. But at the end of the day, now everyone knows that's a hollow threat. They never will.
The difference would be that, there wasn't a shitload of money in the comic book industry that was also going into the pockets of the people in Congress.
True.
So I think that's probably the main reason it hasn't happened.
Right.
But so like technically I'm just saying that like the threat, the implied threat or direct threat of if you don't do this, we will. And then so they did. that was the shadow over the comic code the entire time, essentially. But the fact is that even though it went through the democratic process and was threatened to be legislated, it was done based on bullshit. Like we talked about Wertham's studies and how he looked at this stuff. So yeah, even over something seems to be happen through the democratic process doesn't necessarily mean that that's the democratic process. Here's one that's a little bit simpler. I think Hitler was a beginner compared to the comic book industry.
Fuck off.
Especially in that soon after World War II, you'd think that at that point people would go, wait a second, who the fuck is this?
Hitler was a beginner. No. No, stop. No.
Of course, if that was said these days, somebody on Twitter would say, oh, no, he didn't mean that. What he meant was Hitler's earlier days as a painter.
Right, yeah.
Fair enough.
Or if he lost his job at Disney, if Disney didn't renew his contract, people would be defending him and give him his own shitty movie.
Oh, Wertham would definitely have a YouTube channel if he was around today.
Oh, God. Jesus Christ. Yeah, that's so correct. Fucking hurts.
Yeah.
His career would have been a lot longer lasting. Well, I guess he was pretty old at the time.
Yeah, so. This is like the calling comics, worse than Hitler. That's some Jordan Peterson shit, right? Like, I'm not crazy. If the Lobster Man said that, I would just be like, yeah, okay. Sure, buddy.
I mean, to be fair to Wertham, the words he uses are in a constructed sentence that makes sense.
Apologies to Dr. Wertham.
So, one of the things that he focused on in Seduction was 4 pages dedicated to Batman and Robin. You guys want to take a guess what his problem with Batman and Robin was?
Homosexuality?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I was really hoping it wasn't. I was hoping it was the punching people.
Nope.
Yeah, I was hoping it was teaching the child to training a child soldier. I was really hoping that was going to be the problem.
And to be clear, I did want to mention also that when it comes to the crime and the horror comics, there was some stuff that it's just socially it wasn't even part of the problem with society didn't see it as a problem because it was norms, like the misogyny,
right? Yeah,
inherent. So in that way, Wertham did kind of just stumble upon a couple of good points.
Broken watch.
But so he when it came to the dynamic duo, Wertham liked to draw the reader's attention to the Wayne Manor, and its beautiful flowers in large vases. It's quote. Apparently, that means something. I don't.
Right. Well, flowers. The profession of being a florist was a feat. Is that the right word? Similar to being a hairdresser at the time. Which is weird because other people would argue that flowers are
it's a symbol of wealth.
No, a symbol of the female organ.
Oh,
yeah. I think what's her name? What was that painter? I think she might make that point.
Well, throughout history, flowers have been painted surreptitiously to look like female body parts.
Right. And the euphemism deflowering.
Yes, true. Yeah. So it really is depending on who's looking at it. Depends what they define it as.
So here's a couple of panels that we can look at to kind of get an idea what his deal was. So this was the early Batman and Robin panel. They're sleeping in bed together, presumably they put those clothes on right after Bruce just had his way with Dick. I don't know.
Right.
like really, it's the kind of thing where, like you'd have to almost be looking for it to think it was something that matters.
Well, here's the weird thing about that time in sort of social history as well, is that they were depicted in bed together because the idea of them being homosexual was so unfamiliar to most people of the time.
Nobody
nowadays,
the Raiders wouldn't have even considered it.
No, nowadays we look at that and we think unusual, to put it mildly, but like depictions of because Laurel and Hardy shared a bed, but then they were a comedy duo, and so it was for comedic purposes because two grown men would never share a bed. It was this.
I mean, if you think of it like he adopted Dick, so like, and parents sleep in their bed with their kids all the time.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Especially back then, when people didn't, have a lot of beds lying around, but they had a lot of kids.
Now, I don't know if parents do this with their kids a lot, but if they have the money, I suppose.
What are they, tanning?
I guess that's tanning, yeah.
I guess you're out at night all the time, like, and if you have to appear during the day, it would be weird if you're a pasty third shifter as a rich guy, so...
Probably.
True, yeah, again, social norms at the time would have meant that
if
rich
they're
people
gay,
would have had
why
a
are
tan.
they covering up?
Right.
Yes, true.
And I don't know. It's really weird that people look for that stuff, and to such a degree. Like, so there's one quote.
I think the only reason we sort of see what he's talking about is because we've had decades of hearing what he's talking about.
Well, yeah, and the language has changed as well. The sort of unspoken language, we see that now. We see them in bed together, and we think, oh, they're a couple. And some people think that's still abhorrent. But there was a time when that would have been perfectly innocent. And of course, they're tanning together. They're in the tanning room.
Right.
So,
what else would they be doing there?
So
yeah, that's
his quote about it
giving
was
each other skin cancer, I guess.
He also had a problem with Bruce would like to hang around in a manner with in a dressing gown. And so his quote was, "It's like a wish dream of two homosexuals living together." Which, set aside the fact that that's just meant to be a negative thing, the idea in general. Like,
well, let's assume the homophobia at this point. But,
he wasn't even making. He didn't seem to, as far as I can see. Maybe there's something written somewhere else. But like the fact that Dick was a child too, but he wasn't like worried about that aspect of it, I guess.
It doesn't seem like he was. I don't know that he knows that Dick's supposed to be a kid. Like,
well, I mean, he's Robin the Boy Wonder. But
that's true. But
and it says in this panel we just looked at, it's his ward.
Yeah, and again, society at the time, I'm not sure what age of consent was then.
It was like 3, I think. I don't know.
Oh God, I don't even want to think about that.
But like a lot of 60s and 50s pop songs reference being in love with a girl who's 16,
true,
which now doesn't reflect too well on modern sensibilities. But
not
like
really.
Lucifer writing and chat hit it. The pedophilia is just assumed as part of the homophobia.
Yeah. I mean, there's a good chance that could be it. But I also think, they didn't really care how old the boy was. And if it had been a girl, I wonder if they would have cared at all. Like if
probably not.
No.
Well, I mean, it's just to kind of get off the this fucking unfortunate topic that I took us to, just to kind of cleanse the palate a bit. The female version of Dick Grayson would be Pussy Grey Daughter.
God damn it!
That's one of my favorite things ever. I don't know why. I had the same reaction you did, where when I first saw it, I'm like, "Holy fucking shit!"
I've been shot. That art's cool though too. Like if that was on a comic book cover, I don't care what the book is called. I'll read that. Sure, there's my $4.
So the interesting, just real quick about that one panel where they're in bed together, by the way. So Wertham was preparing to make his case on national television, and as he was doing that, the creators of Batman were unwittingly served him fresh fodder. So Batman number 84 hit newsstands in April 1954 during his Senate testimony, and the story 10 Nights of Fear began with that one of the most infamous panels in Batman history, Bruce and Dick waking up in bed together. So it was like just really bad timing on their part. So
damn it, DC, hitting your editorial deadlines for fucking once. How dare you?
And honestly, I did a video about this too whenever it was revealed or announced that that Tim Drake is bisexual. Got a video about that and how it actually was a good idea in the comic sense as well as in the meta sense, because this idea that Bruce and Robin, whichever Robin, or have been gay, it's been around a long time. Somebody mentioned the ambiguously gay duo. That was funny back in the day to me. I don't know that I'd find it fun anymore. Maybe, I don't know, but it's been around. So like making Robin, one of the Robins anyway, bisexual kind of just says, you know what, fuck you. We don't care about that, because it was like they tried to avoid that for a long time. They introduced Batwoman originally, pretty soon after the Wertham, because they wanted to, give Batman someone to date that was a woman. So it's like, no, he's not gay. He's not gay. Don't call him gay.
And I don't want to jump too far ahead in the chronology, but of course in the 1966 Batman TV series, they introduced Aunt Harriet as a character so that people wouldn't think that Bruce and Dick were a gay couple who lived with their butler.
Right.
Which I don't know what having an old spinster aunt there exactly does to.
She was kind of no nonsense lady that she wouldn't let that kind of shit happen. I don't know, I guess
So she didn't know they were Batman and Robin.
That's true.
So yeah, so why would you know?
They're trying to
That's a good
apply
point.
logics to 60s Batman. I don't know that works too well.
And then to follow up on the Batwoman thing, as well as similarly to the the Robin thing, is like she was the newer Batwoman is also a lesbian in the comics. So
yep,
at least eventually DC found its way there. And you know what? By the way, this is an idea I've had for a while. Maybe this would be good for a podcast episode. Just this idea that DC historically seems to be much more reactive to things than Marvel. I've kind of noticed, I don't know. We'll talk about it another time. But I've noticed a few examples where it's like,
I do think the inclusion of Tim Drake being bisexual sort of retroactively makes Batman a cishet guy, because there's never been anything that resembles tension between those two, right? Like Tim's been around and he's been banging Catwoman on the side the whole time, right? And it's just like never been a thing.
Well, talking about DC being a little progressive, I don't know. Are you going to talk about Marv Wolfman?
We are. He actually plays a role in this whole thing. His name in particular.
Right. I'll let you get to that then, because that's one anecdote I do know.
Where were we? Yeah. So EC Comics, and I think we'll probably take a moment to pause on, not pause, but like kind of just stew on EC and nope, not right now. My bad. I looked at the outline. We're getting to the Senate hearings. That's where we are. And so here is a short clip, including Dr. Wertham himself speaking, as well as a clip from the hearings, I think, including the debut in this episode of our fucking legend of Bill motherfucking Gaines.
The man himself.
The real question is this: are comic books good or are they not good?
Because that's the question always, right? It's just such a simple question you ask about
good
anything.
or not good. Like some of them are good.
Yeah, I mean, there's an era in the mid to late '90s when, like, not really, they weren't good.
Yeah, no, some of them are The whole Onslaught story arc and Heroes
Yeah,
Reborn.
the spider, the clone fucking thing, man. Holy shit.
The clone. All right, we're gonna get off topic. We gotta.
If you want to raise a generation that is half stormtroopers and half cannon fodder with a dash of illiteracy, then comic books are good. In fact, they are perfect.
I just want to address the illiteracy part. I know some words. I can read pretty well. And that's kind of probably understating it. I was reading I mentioned this in my Watchmen video, and a couple of people took it the wrong way. So let me try and make sure I don't say it so that somebody takes it all weird. I'm not boasting about my reading ability or my literacy level or anything. I'm saying that comic books played a big role in me reading and then getting into reading outside of comics as well. I wasn't very interested in reading until I got into comics. And also there's just a lot of concepts and words and stuff in comics that you don't see in a lot of other kids' books and whatnot. And it's to the point where I was reading Stephen King when I was 12, you know what I mean? And Anne Rice and shit. And it's I credit comic books with that. With just being willing to read, period. So to try and act like somehow it's going to make kids less literate doesn't make any sense to me. Of course, this is 90s, 80s comics I'm talking about. I read, he was talking about, 40s, 50s comics. So maybe they were a little bit dumber. I don't know.
Not that dumb.
So yeah, so some people in the comments of that Watchmen video, oh, you're going to brag about being able to read really well. I'm like, it's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that comics are good for promoting reading, promoting literacy.
Dane, are you telling me that people in the YouTube comment section are prone to bad faith arguments? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Well, look, that one stuck with me because that was pretty soon after I started YouTube, so I hadn't fully really, absorbed that fact too well yet.
Fair point.
So I took it. I was pretty upset. I was like, "What? That's not what I said." And I listened to it again. I'm like, "That's not what I said." Anyway.
Just a very short while ago, an 11-year-old boy committed a holdup in California and killed a woman of 42. And when the police came to arrest this 11-year-old boy, his older brother, who's 20, said, if you want to know the cause of all this, here it is. It's these rotten comic books. Cut them out, and things like this would...
So, take note of the dramatic tension building violin.
I do love it.
I mean, look, I having just made that mission statement for the Phantom Initiative, I know all about music to, heighten tension. And then there was the moment of basically sounded like fascists, chanting or something. Just, I guess well done propaganda, I suppose.
It's a master class in forcing the adversity.
Truly. Yeah, propaganda is often necessary to force adversity. We should probably do an episode about that sometime.
Probably.
Not happen. It is my opinion, without any reasonable doubt and without any reservation, that comic books are an important contributing factor in many cases of juvenile delinquency.
Okay, before we let this legend who just popped up on screen just ooze his legend all over us and get generations of women pregnant.
The raw sexual charisma.
Really think about all the subjectivity in just that statement, from the delinquency thing, which we talked about. What does that mean? It can mean basically a child doing anything outside of what's expected of them, right?
Is that actually Wertham's voice as well, speaking at the...
Yes.
So he's the one also narrating that part of the...
Yep.
Right.
And then, on top of the delinquency subjectivity, then there's the, just all the subjectivity involved with Wertham's study, and it's just absurd.
Yeah.
I didn't know there was a connection to Albert Fish. What the hell? Was he his doctor or something? What?
All right. So for the people who don't know who Albert Fish is, could you tell the class, and definitely not me, who definitely knows?
Well, let me find just a quick thing to explain. Albert Fish, born 1870, died 1936, was an American serial killer, grapist, kitty diddler, and cannibal who committed at least, I got to click on the link. He committed at least 3 child murders from 1924 to 1928. He was also known as the Gray Man and the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Brooklyn Vampire, the Moon Maniac, and the Boogeyman. He was a suspect in at least 5 murders in his lifetime. He confessed to the 3 murders that police were able to trace to a known homicide, and he confessed to stabbing at least 2 other people. He boasted that he had children in every state, and at one time stated his number of victims was about 100. So, yeah, he's, all around not a good dude. He's basically what Wertham suggested comic books would make every kid into.
Yikes.
But no, I didn't know there was a connection with him and Wertham.
Oh, the defense's chief witness was Fredric Wertham. Looky that. That's a fun fact.
Oh, well, okay. So, yeah. All right. Well, I mean, I thought there was more of a connection than that, but.
So are either of these people from Wisconsin? I just have to do the Wisconsin check.
Wisconsin check. Trying to think.
Well, judging by his accent, I would say Wertham is very unlikely to be from Wisconsin.
I mean, we have a lot of Germans in the area, and
It's
even
true.
then, like, a German accent wasn't unheard of.
I mean, isn't there? Yeah, I went to a town there that was just like a little German town.
There's a town literally called Germantown.
That's it. That's the one I went to. All right, now everybody brace yourselves, okay? Like, if you ever been like a rock concert and like the lead singer or the guitarist that you're just like, oh, he's fucking legend when he does his solo or whatever. Just prepare yourselves, all right?
The Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency had as a prime witness Wertham. Now, as soon as I heard this thing was formed, I asked for permission to appear. 2 decades ago, my late father was in.
Now we get to a little bit about this guy. So William Gaines was the publisher of EC Comics at the time, and let me find my information here. I've got too many tabs. Too many tabs. I'm getting there. Calm down. Calm down, guys.
You.
Okay.
We're building the anticipation.
I know. I'm taking forever. What? Did I just lose my freaking page? What the hell?
Uh-oh.
So I'll just go based off of memory real quick. William Gaines was he was the publisher of EC Comics. He was this is one of the rare examples when nepotism paid off really well. His father was the publisher of EC Comics, originally called Educational Comics, EC Educational, and it had educational comics that they put out. Nothing lurid, nothing fantastical or anything. And then his father tragically died in a boating accident, and who had prior to that, the younger Gaines had no interest in comics or anything like that. He was all about science and whatnot. And then suddenly he's like, well, now I own a comic book publishing company. And so he just figured, I'm going to take it in the direction I want to take it in. And he started making a lot of science fiction comics, and then ultimately horror comics, which are the ones that took off. As we saw earlier, once they took off, they really took off. And following that, a whole bunch of other companies started putting out, at least according to what I've seen, I haven't read them myself, not as good horror comics.
Can I just add a little bit of color to his father? The original EC Comics, one of the books they published was Picture Stories from the Bible.
Wow.
Cool.
So it makes you wonder if they'd kept doing that, they probably would have still got into trouble for publishing lurid material.
I was just saying, depending on how you're publishing images from the Bible, that can be a horror comic too.
Yeah, just a real legend. I made this earlier, and I didn't make the image itself, but I put the text on it. Yeah. There's a lot of really good art about Bill Gaines too, by the way. If you just ever want to look up some pictures of Bill Gaines, there's really cool art. I'm actually going to order this shirt from Legal Defense Fund. So if you, we'll get to them toward the end, but if you ever want to support the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, which you should if you can, that's how I'm going to do it.
They are rad.
And so back to the video.
Instrumental in starting the comic magazine industry.
Sorry, let me rewind. But this is him speaking. Looks much younger and clean cut at this time. But this is before he became a counterculture fucking icon.
Peer.
2 decades ago, my late father was instrumental in starting the comic magazine industry. He edited the first few issues of the first modern comic magazine, Famous Funnies.
Famous what?
Funnies. I was the first publisher in these United States to publish horror comics. I'm responsible. I started them.
So that's his father's quote.
Some may not like them. That's a matter of personal taste. It would be just as difficult.
No, wait. Is he quoting his father or is he saying this?
I believe he's talking about himself.
Okay, so.
Or at least the company.
This was the moment when we were recording this before when I was like, holy shit, this guy does not get enough of due. You know what I mean? Like, ultimately, he was not successful, and that's probably why he's not recorded more favorably in this instance.
And you developed an immediate crush on him, for which you will carry for the rest of your life.
For many reasons, because he's sitting here like
right.
He asked to be there for one thing. This is, the Senate just said they're going to have this hearing, and he's like he said, he's like, I want to be there, and he goes, and then he takes, he's fully accountable for everything. He's not, but he also is fucking holding his ground on, like, it's a matter of taste. This, you were saying these things are bad and terrible and whatnot. I disagree. And then he goes to bat for kids in a minute, which is, really
even
where he sold it to me. It's like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Some may not like them. That's a matter of personal taste. It would be just as difficult to explain the harmless thrill of a horror story to a Dr. Wertham as it would be to explain the sublimity of love to a frigid old maid. What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of our own children? Do we forget that they are citizens too and entitled to the essential freedom to read? Or do we think our children so evil, so vicious, so simple-minded that it takes but a comic magazine story of murder to set them to murder, of robbery to set them to robbery?
Yeah, legendary. Love that quote.
Yep.
I mean, maybe the frigid old maid thing's a little bit of product of its time, but it makes the point.
Yeah, guy just doesn't get it, right? He's just an old guy, doesn't get it, and it's remarkable that Gaines' defense of kids is something you just don't ever hear. Like, kids, are they that stupid that you show them something and they're just monkey see, monkey do, right? Like,
yeah, it seems like, what was it, the 80s and 90s, whenever it kind of, it's almost like maybe we shifted away from that post 50s, but then 80s and 90s, we kind of went back in the other direction.
It definitely came back around. It's still around today, right? We can't have a gay character in a movie. Otherwise, we're going to turn the kids gay. What the fuck does that? Right. Walk me through it. Show me the steps. Oh, you can't. Right. Of course. You're just a crazy person.
I mean, it's just, there's been a pandemic of kids, just going gay once that Lightyear scene in Lightyear with the parents for a split second. Wow. There's so many gay kids made from that. not only misunderstands kids, but obviously misunderstands being gay
Right.
as well.
Or doing, in this case, murder and robbery, right? Like,
Right.
What causes those things? Well, in the case of robbery, systemic issues largely, or rich people wanting to be more rich.
Well, in the case of kids doing, if we want to say delinquency is things that most people would agree are bad, right? So like assault or whatever. Like the real contributing factor to behavior on generally that kids do or don't do, and this is the thing about pretty much every example. I think I'd probably safely say every one of them, where they're like, think of the children. They're trying to put blame on something other than their own fucking parenting.
Yep. Or just the availability of school and after school care, right? Like, okay, so kids are going to school at this time, but parents are still working 9 to 5. So you got 2 hours to make work and they just let them run rampant. And then they have wants and needs and desires, and no access to them, and an unlimited amount of time or a large amount of time to do nothing with, right? Like, things are going to happen. People get bored.
Yep. So it's, kids need to be allowed to fuck up too. It's like, obviously you don't want them to go too far. There are certain things you can't, kind of just recover from, and they will, stain your life forever. But like, I don't know, kids need to be able to.
Do you know what keeps kids from, with like free time after school, from murder and robbery and being a juvenile delinquent?
Good cartoons and Hot Pockets?
I was going to say reading.
Oh, well, okay.
And reading cheaply available literature with interesting images.
Oh my God, imagine that. So the problem isn't the problem, it's actually the solution. Interesting.
Right. Yeah. Weird how that works. Libraries
so,
are great.
This is in hindsight, we look at this as like, this is, oh my God, Bill Gaines going to bat like that. What a legend. Nobody else viewed it that way back then.
No.
Because, I don't think it's in this clip, but they basically started bringing up, they started describing, maybe even showed some of the covers from Tales from the Crypt, including the one with the beheaded woman.
Yep.
And it's important to notice that on the cover of that, when we looked at it, I can bring it back up. It's not showing that it literally is a beheaded person, because it's cut off, by the panel's cut off, or the bottom of the page or whatever. Where is it? So you can't really see, like, the blood is black.
Yeah.
Which is still a way that they do that, like in a Wolverine comic sometimes or whatever, when he's just slicing fools up, the blood might be black.
Yeah, it's pretty common.
But there's no wound here. Obviously what it's suggesting is what it's suggesting. Nobody's going to deny that, but it's not as graphic as you might think it is. It's more suggestive.
Right. It is when you think about it for a second, but like at a glance, like, it is what it is, right? It's a guy holding the head.
I mean, it could just be that he's just holding, she's a woman on her knees, and she's just kind of maybe on ecstasy. And
I think you're stretching, my friend.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Big stretch. Your back, you get that kink in your back out with that stretch? Or?
Yeah, it feels good.
Okay, good.
But basically, they describe this stuff. The Senate, describe it, and they asked him, "Do you think this is in bad taste?" Or actually, what was the question? I think was, "Do you think this is in good taste?" And he said, "I think so. Yes."
Right. Well,
now,
when your position is, it is a matter of opinion, right? Like, yeah, it's if you don't like it, that's okay, right? That's kind of his whole thing.
It didn't play well in the newspapers. I'll say that.
No. Yeah, because it's one of those things that, like, he is correct, but it sounds in such a way that it is easily used against him.
We know what this kind of touches on is a thing that I kind of have obsessed over in my content generally is, the idea of objectivity and subjectivity in art.
Right.
And that, like, yeah, maybe most people would consider something distasteful or whatever, but like, that's not what they asked him. And he answered honestly, and still people, but there became this this judgment, as if like, him saying that that's in good taste is basically him saying, I like cutting off women's heads,
right,
or something. I like pictures of women with their heads cut, or something like that. Yeah. So then we get to the code itself.
The fucking comics code.
Oh, actually, I have a quick exchange of dialogue here from that Senate hearing. Mr. Beezer, which was the I guess the let's see, yeah, basically the whatever I guess the prosecutor. I don't know what his role would have been.
The Senate hearing, so a chairman.
Yeah. Is there any limit to you can think of that you would not put in a magazine because you thought a child should not see or read about it? Mr. Gaines said, my only limits are the bounds of good taste, what I consider good taste. And that's when Senator Kefauver, alluding to the cover with the beheaded woman, this seems to be a man with a bloody axe holding a woman's head up, which has been severed from her body. Do you think that is in good taste? Gaines, yes, sir, I do, for the cover of a horror comic. This exact quote. But, of course, when that's printed in a newspaper, it's just like, yes.
You're right. They leave out the context.
Yeah. And then there was another one, which was, this is July 1, Suspense Stories number 23. It seems to be a man with a woman in a boat, and he is choking her to death with a crowbar. Is that in good taste? I think so. Is the quote. So, not a great look, I guess.
No. Certainly one
but I mean,
of those,
look, the deck was stacked against them at that point anyway, right? Like the fact they're having the hearing, they've got Wertham, they're ready with the examples that they know are going to, they know what the public is going to think about this.
Right.
It was already done deal. It was just a formality to even go through that. So.
Yeah, like there's only so much you can do, and also these are senators. They're politicians. They're skilled. Like their job is manipulating conversations in a way, right? Like that's part of what you have to do to be in that position. So
yeah, well,
go ahead.
Sorry. The other thing to consider is that because he's coming in, probably, I mean, he knows his stuff, but he doesn't know what they're going to ask him. So they have no idea. He has no idea that they've framed this to be entirely negative and that they're leading the narrative and they're basically trying to catch him out. So he's coming in with his knowledge of the genre, of the format, and then they're leading him down the path where they can basically shoot him some gotcha questions. And it's something that you wouldn't allow yourself to be caught up these days, because you'd have a team of lawyers advising you exactly what to say and what not to say.
True. You wouldn't get the editor-in-chief or the publisher of Marvel to go before Congress without
there'd be like
team of lawyers
and stuff. Yeah.
Which is why it's fascinating whenever you do see somebody get caught out by one of these committees when they're ill prepared for something. These days, it tends to be people like, Rupert Murdoch's been caught out and other people like that.
Yeah.
So it was the newspapers said, it was like quoted him. It's good taste, on front page story, by the way, the New York Times. No harm in horror, trumpeted the headline. And although he couldn't have known it at the time, the hearings marked the beginning of the end for Gaines Comic Book Company. The publisher tried to rally the industry to defend itself, but the other publishers were looking for a quick solution to a problem that threatened their business. Which, I don't know that I think that's wrong or anything, but like, you got to respect Gaines for being, willing to step up
He tried to fight the fight. Unfortunately, it was when you're the guy behind the most popular genre in comics. Your competition is motivated to let you hang. Also,
So
once again, as has been a recurring thing I've noticed in our 50s flashback month, the New York Times fucking sucks.
Yeah, and it's man, I don't know how I just kind of respected them like inherently for a long time. I don't know why, just
Yeah.
because the name, the prestige or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, like, I think part of it is, especially because you grew up in Texas and I grew up with, conservative people in Wisconsin, is like they tell you how liberal the New York Times is, right? Like they're obsessed with it. And then you find out the truth and you're like, what the fuck are you on about? Like you're wrong. You're
Yep.
wrong in the worst way imaginable.
I kind of equated them with like the Washington Post, and it's not like the Washington Post is like a bastion of, just fucking leftist thought or anything, but generally they've done some actually pretty solid journalism.
They have.
So
and the New York Times has too, but like,
yeah,
they.
Morgan, you're cutting out a bit. I don't know if you got to.
Also, the New York Times has a history of taking the wrong side on these issues.
Okay. Did you hear me tell you that you were cutting out?
Yeah, I adjusted my mic. Did it work?
Seems so.
Okay.
So those hearings took place in June, and then one day in April of 1954, and then in October of 1954, the publishers formed the Comics Magazine Association of America and adopted a regulatory code. And this was something I didn't fully understand when I was younger too. Like, who was the Comics Code? You know what I mean? Like, did the government assign some people to do it? No, it was literally just the publishers themselves coming together and saying, here's what we're going to promise to the government that we're going to do and maintain ourselves. And that's where the code itself and the provisions came from.
Yep.
And initially, Gaines refused to join and submit his comics for review. But the problem was wholesalers, which were, the ones who distributed things nationally. That was the only game in town, right? Like you had to, or they wouldn't accept your books. So you either submit or die, kind of thing.
So I have a question about that. The wholesalers, that was sort of the same thing like with books now, where like they buy them and then sell them for distribution, right?
I think pretty much with probably some differences, yeah. Generally, it's not so like the direct market
so like
is when the comic book shop becomes a thing is the direct market. This is like I guess the indirect market. So yeah, whatever wholesalers existed at the time were basically the equivalent of Diamond and
Alliance and whoever else. I think Alliance is gone now.
Yeah, I mean, up until just a couple of years ago, Diamond had a monopoly for quite a while.
Forever, yeah.
So yeah, eventually Gaines did capitulate because, what was he going to do? Just not publish comics anymore.
Right.
And his relationship with his fellow publishers was short-lived because if you can't tell, Gaines is a bit of a he was a rogue.
Well, it seems like, from memory, he's one of the few independents because the other two certainly started off as parts of other publishing companies, didn't they?
Well, there's a lot of comic publishers at the time, besides DC and Marvel. You've got Fawcett.
I think at that time, Marvel was still going back and forth between Atlas and Timely or something like.
Yeah,
I forget exactly whenever they finally adopted, and then DC was DC at that point,
right?
But
so they had no, as they do now with Warner's, they had no company above them. DC didn't.
I don't think so by that time.
I don't think so. Nope. I mean, Marvel definitely wasn't owned by Disney yet, for sure. But yeah, I mean, think with Warner's, it was probably in the 70s that they bought DC. If I might be mistaken. If somebody in chat knows.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was a bigger publishing company behind them, like still at this point, like there was in the early days, who would be sort of less hands-on about it and not want to get in the trenches like Bill Gaines did.
Oh, there were two publishers that the wholesalers did not require to have the code. By the way,
Really,
Dell Comics and Classics Illustrated, which were basically children's and probably Bible stories and stuff. What EC used to be. So I guess when it comes to actual books that are meant for kids, they're not. The easier way to do this just would have been like I don't know, newsstands taking some responsibility for what they're selling or something. I don't know. Seems easier. So we're going to look at the provisions. Or you guys want to look at how things played out with Bill Gaines first?
I think we should look at the provisions and then come back to our sort of Bill Gaines centered example and show off some comic art.
Hell yeah. So we are going to be looking at one of the coolest, just like I really wish I had time. I would have cut it out of the original recording so you guys could listen to me and Morgan coming upon this thing in real time as we were recording it before. There's this comic that was in really the last comic that EC Comics ever published. There's this story around it, and then the comic itself and everything about it is just fucking awesome. Everything except the fact that it was the last comic EC ever published.
But they went out on top, right? Like on,
at least in terms of what they're putting out, yes.
Right, like
it retroactively becomes something that's just really well known and except for I guess to us,
a work of art.
But so there's a whole preamble. It was adopted on October 26, 1954. I don't want to read the preamble, but I kind of feel like we need to because there's some language stuff that maybe is important.
I think we should just jump into the list.
Okay. Well, let me just scan it because I know there's a couple of phrases that I wanted to highlight.
Sure.
Constantly improving techniques and higher standards, measuring up to responsibilities. The outstanding example of the development of comic books as a unique and effective tool for instruction and education.
Which were excluded from the code.
Yep.
Fascinating.
So there's mentions of violations of standards of good taste. There's that taste thing again.
That's got to work its way back in there.
Which might tend toward corruption of the comic book as an instructive and wholesome form of entertainment will be eliminated.
So literally, we're going to eliminate a whole art form of horror.
Oh, they're going to eliminate some stuff. We're going to look at what they eliminated.
Yeah, I know.
It's kind of crazy.
It really is.
So, number one, crimes shall never be presented in such a way as to create sympathy for the criminal, to promote distrust of the forces of law and justice, or to inspire others with a desire to imitate criminals.
Comics must be propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, not just propaganda, but like any forces of law. Because there's one later on that's like, don't show authority in a negative light. Period.
Right.
Like any kind of authority.
So think of how many early Batman stories before we really get Batman's rogues gallery. It's all gangsters and corrupt politicians.
Early Superman stories were him dealing with people in authority that were corrupt and whatnot. Yeah, none of that. And then just like think about the characters that wouldn't exist if you can't create sympathy for the criminal. So what does that mean? I guess just anybody who has committed a crime,
right,
of any kind. So there'd be no Harley Quinn,
no Catwoman.
Yeah, okay, or should just be constantly be a villain and being arrested every single issue.
No Deadpool.
No Deadpool. No. Basically, the anti-hero would not be a thing that exists.
Yeah, that whole genre. Definitely no Punisher.
Well, we're also missing the fact that technically they got around this without anybody knowing because all superheroes are criminals.
Right. Necessary.
That's true. Yeah, I mean that's
because they're all vigilantes, unless they're working under the authority of the state. They're all vigilantes, and vigilantism is a
right.
Very good point. I mean, I guess nobody ever thought of that, which is kind of cool. You're right. So number 2, no comic shall explicitly present the unique details and methods of a crime. Okay.
Well, that's something that continued in film and television for many years as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like Breaking Bad is a good example of like, it seems like they're showing you how to make meth, but they're not.
Nope.
Believe me, I know how to make meth, and that's not how you do it. Policemen, judges, government officials, and respected institutions shall never be presented in such a way as to create disrespect for established authority.
Respected institutions. There's a lot of wiggle room in that phrase, isn't there?
Well, especially when you're talking about like polices.
Yeah, that's
government.
yeah.
Like you think about policemen now.
Interestingly, you were allowed to, or the code let slip if those government officials were from certainly non-American countries, but especially if you had a depiction of like the Russian military or a Soviet politician, those were allowed to be disrespected for sure.
It's true. And I'm actually going to turn my camera on to highlight this point. Because this is something I plan to cover at some point. Maybe I will soon.
Ready for the Dane jump scare?
So this Marvel in the 1950s, decades, and then you see who's on the cover there.
Yep.
Anybody that knows a little bit about the history of Captain America and continuity of Marvel Comics knows that in the 50s he was still frozen, but this is still canon. So how can that be? Well, because it wasn't really Steve Rogers. It was a guy who thought he was Steve Rogers, was given super soldier serum, was told he was Steve Rogers, and kind of went crazy or something like that, thinking he was Steve Rogers. And in this, there's no, the Red Skull exists, but he's not a Nazi anymore. You know what Red Skull is in the 50s?
He's a commie.
He's a dirty commie. And Captain America talks about and beats up communists the same way. Like, there's no distinction in terms of like how evil the communist is from how evil the Nazi was.
Right. Helping establish that. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's how powerful the Red Scare was.
Right.
And to the point where, Marvel they haven't said that didn't happen. What they did was basically they wrote this retcon that it wasn't really Steve Rogers, because that would be really fucking embarrassing to think that real Captain America acted this way.
Right.
But
and that the real Captain America wouldn't know the difference.
Right. Jack Kirby got wrapped up in it. He even apologized eventually, but like,
oh wow,
he was I mean to cover this too for a long time, but like he's on record in the 50s and stuff saying, just talking about commies as if they're the worst thing ever. And then closer, I guess, to probably the 70s or 80s, there's an interview where he's like, yeah, I was kind of wrapped up in all that stuff. A lot of people were, and he basically, acknowledged that it was a little silly to be talking about communists that way.
Right. Kind of walked it back.
Yep. So, but that's just to illustrate your point that it's totally okay to talk about the Reds or the corrupt commies or whatever.
Also a difficult time to be a comics writer when you couldn't make half the country a villain.
Right.
Yeah, like you can now. It's really easy.
Well, yeah, sometimes just by showing exactly what they do.
Yep.
You just quote them and have the Red Skull say what they say. And it's weird how it fits the Red Skull's character so well.
It's weird. Like only whenever the man himself pointed it out did anybody notice.
Right.
Anyway.
Oh yeah.
That's true. I don't think anybody knew until Jordan Peterson said, or I'm sure somebody turned him onto it, but still, it must have been somebody that knew his work really well. Anyway, if crime is depicted, it shall be as a sordid and unpleasant activity. So, like, if there's a comic
it's
where
got to be dirty and messy and
yeah,
not fun.
Criminals shall not be presented so as to be rendered glamorous or to occupy a position which creates a desire for emulation.
Again, unless
Can't
they're
have any-
politicians.
Right. Yep. And then this one's crazy. In every instance, good shall triumph over evil, and the criminal punished for his misdeeds. So that basically eliminates
No cliffhangers allowed.
Cliffhangers, yeah. It can't have a story that lasts more than an issue. It's got to be all wrapped up. Scenes of excessive violence shall be prohibited. Scenes of brutal torture, excessive and unnecessary knife and gunplay, physical agony, gory and gruesome crime shall be. And there's just, these adjectives and adverbs and whatnot.
Yeah. What's the difference between prohibited and eliminated?
I mean, what's the difference between torture and brutal torture? Matter of taste, I guess.
I guess so.
What's the difference between knife and gunplay and unnecessary knife and gunplay?
Yeah. Physical agony. How do you... Your bad guy can't go, ow? Like that's,
I guess it's the number of W's you have in the panel.
Oh, right. 4 is too many. We got a 3 is enough. That's just pain, not agony.
I just spilled water on my keyboard. Good job.
Ooh,
good job,
smooth move.
No unique or unusual methods of concealing weapons shall be shown. So, like, they're literally just thinking, what do we want kids to never do? Let's not show those things.
Right.
We don't want kids hiding any weapons, so we can't show people hiding weapons. And it's the kind of thing where you just, the more you clench your fist around the thing and things slip through your fingers, so to speak. It's just, I don't know. Their imagination ran a little bit wild in some cases. Then it starts getting into, well, then there's the kidnapping. The crime of kidnapping shall never be portrayed in any detail, nor shall any profit accrue to the abductor or kidnapper. And I just think it's weird to highlight kidnapping when they've already talked about crime so much.
Right.
Like, didn't you already say that? It's kind of like how there's like several different things in the 10 Commandments that are like, don't be looking at any other gods or whatever.
Yeah, the first 3 commandments, the 10 commandments are, I'm the special one.
I'm a jealous bitch.
Right. Which is how they didn't have room to put, like, thou shalt not own other people.
Yeah, don't like sexually assault people or anything like that. The letters on the word, the letters of the word crime on a comics magazine cover shall never be appreciably greater in dimension than the other words contained in the title. The word crime shall never appear alone on a cover. I feel like that having the word crime, it actually helps to illustrate the fact that this is not a good thing.
Right.
Like, if you're saying like fun times and it's got like a somebody kidnapping somebody or whatever, I understand that, but
right, yeah,
crime says it right there. This is a crime. Don't do it.
Take the axe with the head, the decapitated head comic. Replace the title with Fun Times.
Fun times. Fun times for
that's
kids.
stuck in my brain now.
Restraint of the use of the word of crime.
That.
They're really focused on crime as a word, as if like, criminals don't tend to sit around and think about, let's do some crimes. What crimes are we gonna do? Crime.
Right.
It's like a cartoonish idea of what criminals are.
Well, we know the definition of criminal. It's provided to us by comics, and these people would know that a criminal is a member of a superstitious and cowardly lot.
True. They're all like that. So, well, I'm sorry. I just realized we're almost at 2.5 hours, so I just need to breeze through here so we can get to the rest.
The fun stuff.
And I know it's late as hell for Ryan, and it's getting late for Morgan. So, then there's the no use of the word horror or terror in the title. So that just immediately is like, it's like they're writing the rules, and Bill Gaines is sitting there, and they're just like,
making eye contact with him real
Right,
seriously.
fuck
as
you
they're
in
writing it.
particular.
So yeah, no using the word terror in your titles, Bill.
Right, yeah. It is literally, we are conspiring to eliminate a competitor because Congress is a little hackled.
And that's what it is. And that's what, the thing about these types of, you've got capitalist publishers of comics. Their main incentive is profit.
Yep.
And the thing that is selling the best, they now have the power to go, fuck you.
Yep.
And Bill Gaines, he resisted the whole thing, and then he eventually capitulated. And it's like, you can just kind of see this guy being fraught during this period, I imagine. Like he was
I have
probably
to
not having
imagine
a
it
good
was
time.
not easy.
In fact, let's hear from him real quick.
Sure.
So Ray.
By the way, there were comic book burning parties that happened.
Oh, book burnings, the things you do when you're the good guys.
Yep, every time.
Historically speaking, always a good guy.
After the Senate subcommittee hearings, when the industry was somewhat in disarray, the other publishers kind of took over, and all they wanted was a censor. So rather quickly, they moved it along to the point where the Comics Magazine Association was formed, and the first thing they did was outlaw the words horror, terror, weird, and I think every word that I had on any of my titles, the association outlawed.
They're like, you can't have the letters E and C next to each other on a comic book.
Right, yeah.
Which I thought was very funny, although I wasn't amused. I was very angry.
Yeah,
Yep.
just a big fuck you in particular sent his way, because I guess in part probably because he's the biggest competitor, but also like from a Red Scare standpoint, right? You have to make an example of him.
True, and there is a bit of I could give a little bit of kind of leeway for being a valid thing in the sense that if they saw him as this guy is going to kill our industry,
right?
Like in our medium entirely, like that's kind of a. But I mean, still, you couldn't have a conference with him and say, hey, how can we work around like your titles you're using or whatever to make it, work with the guy, right? As an artist, you could figure out ways to do it. I don't know.
Right. What if we collaborate instead of sabotage?
But I mean, essentially, the horror comics thing was doomed from the moment that they had the hearings. Really.
Yeah. From the moment it ended up in the New York Times as a moral panic, you were doomed. Makes me feel really good.
So I'll just rattle off a few things that were banned real quick. Lurid, unsavory, gruesome illustrations eliminated, whatever those mean.
Yep.
All scenes of horror, excessive bloodshed, gory, gruesome crimes, depravity, lust, sadism, nope. Inclusion of stories dealing with evil shall have a moral issue illustrated, and in no sense shall evil be presented alluringly, nor as to injure the sensibilities of the reader.
We're going to have to mind read and make this completely bumper bowling for everyone.
Scenes dealing with or instruments associated with Walking Dead, torture, vampires, vampirism, ghouls, cannibalism, and werewolfism prohibited. You can't have any of that. No, I mean, this is just basically just writing a list of how to get rid of crime and horror comics.
Right, yeah.
Not a way to do it responsibly or anything like that. Just none of it. This is where it starts to get into.
Yeah.
So no profanity, obscenity, smut, vulgarity, or words or symbols which have acquired undesirable meanings. Special precautions to avoid references to physical afflictions or deformities shall be taken. Yikes. So just real ableism, fucking, kind of, I don't know.
I like that technically under the words or symbols which have acquired an undesirable meaning, you couldn't show a swastika. So you can't have Nazis as bad guys anymore, can you?
Well, that gets to the point we're going to get to in a minute about the Stan Lee example, right?
Yeah.
It's like you can't show things that, like, actually this would be a good thing for us to show to kids, and
Right.
we can't. In a certain context, rather. But so although slang and colloquialisms are acceptable, excessive use should be discouraged. Good grammar should be employed.
I feel like that is targeted at some specific minority communities.
Probably. Although I will say that the good grammar thing, if that may have played a role in, like, you know, like I was saying, I learned spelling,
Yeah.
punctuation, and syntax from comics, and maybe that's a holdover from that. Who knows?
Or just those things exist to make a story comprehensible. Like, it's just good writing practice.
So then there's just, man, there's a lot. So there's nudity, none of that, of course. No salacious illustration, suggestive posture. All characters dressed reasonably. Females drawn realistically without exaggeration. And this is where it gets to be a problem for the folks that are calling for a return to the code.
Right. They want the comics code back, but they also want...
Yeah, not that part. Not that part.
Not that part.
They need to be drawn like cartoonishly, freakishly, Liefeldian in nature. So, and then it gets to be really, really fucking, just look, it's anti-queer.
Yeah, that's what it gets down to.
So then no, divorce shouldn't be treated humorously or represented as desirable. Illicit sex relations are neither to be hinted nor portrayed. Respect for parents, the moral code, and for honorable behavior shall be fostered. Sorry, go ahead.
Just looking at a list, rape scenes as well as sexual abnormalities are unacceptable. They literally equate rape and being queer.
Well, I mean, I would say, yeah, but I mean, I was thinking more like the one that stands out, especially specifically about being queer, is sex perversion or any inference to the same.
Yeah,
because that was typically a term that was applied toward it, like perversion.
Yep.
Sexual degeneracy, that type. People are saying degenerate a lot today too. Weird.
I did not see that coming.
But I mean, so then there's just even hetero relationships to show how fucking repressive they were about sex in general.
Yeah.
Passion or romantic interest shall never be treated in such a way as to stimulate the lower and baser emotions. The lower and baser emotions.
Giggity.
Like, I guess being horny on main is a base, lower emotion. I don't know.
Okay, so if I ever get to be in charge of the afterlife, I want to round up these people, and I just want them in a room with nothing but Tumblr feeds. All their internet for the rest of time is just Tumblr shipping forever.
And then there's a whole list of another list that has to do with advertising specifically. So like,
right,
the things that can be advertised and not, which, there's probably some good in that one. Like you can't
that actually, like, oh wow, a reasonable thing.
Tobacco. That's okay. Fair enough.
You're right. No tobacco, no explosives. I'm sure. Okay, fine.
No sexual instruction books. Okay, sure.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. I guess. Whatever.
Yeah.
Should we get into the fun parts?
The fun of it all. Yeah. We got.
Should we talk about the man?
Should
we talk about the wolf?
So, sorry. Let me find where I'm supposed to be at.
Or are we gonna talk about Judgment Day?
Judgment Day.
Yeah, we can talk about Terminator 2.
Yeah, this is turning into a Terminator review really quick.
Yep, surprise! This was a Terminator podcast the whole time.
I mean, honestly, I'm not opposed to that. If we ever get bored of this, let's just go that way, I guess.
Okay, the problem is I've only seen the first 3, and I fell asleep during the 3rd.
That's fine. Just
okay, perfect.
I mean, we're not going to talk about much anyway. So. All right, so you want to see one of the most kind of infamous and controversial things that comics that happened throughout or within the comics code? There were several of them. There's like
yeah.
Maybe we'll do some episode in the future where we revisit and just look at the specific comics. But so this,
I think that would be a fun follow up.
This was a comic from EC Comics. called Judgment Day. Seemingly no different than a lot of science fiction comics that existed at the time. Just
I
art.
love old sci-fi comics art. It's so cool.
There's something about it, right?
Yeah, it's just. I think part of it is because like we know so much more about science. It really takes on this fantasy element, just from the visuals, because like that's not how any of that would look. But like,
but
it's
at the same
close
time,
enough.
Well, I mean, yeah, but at the same time, a lot of things that were, written and drawn in science fiction a long time before they were ever actually realized did influence what ultimately did become science fact.
Yeah.
The rocket ship was, that they were drawing and writing about rocket ships in the 19th century.
Yeah.
Um,
and just even some of the stories, the messages of the stories are sort of timeless in a way.
Yeah, this one being one.
Yeah.
So I have the last panel blacked out. Some of you might know what that is, but otherwise it's pretty, okay. So it's a guy. He's part of a, some future society. He gets in a ship, and he's going someplace. Cool. So this was in the final issue that was published by.
So the comic is about robots and an astronaut.
I got a summary here. I'm just trying to find it.
All right.
My bad.
Sorry, I'm just very excited about this comic.
Oh, I am too, and excited about. Well, not excited, but I know you guys are like, let's get this over with. God damn it! What did I do with it? Sorry, 1 second. Pull that down so I can find what I'm doing. Okay.
So Ryan, what's your favorite like old school sci-fi story?
Oh, that's a really tough one.
Isn't it?
Probably this sort of indie, little known indie sci-fi film came out in the late 70s called Star Wars.
Oh,
that's it's a kind of an important one. Yeah.
No, seriously though, yeah, that's too. I think that's too tough for me to pin down. I'd have to really think about that.
Yeah.
It's kind of, I guess, a little bit of a trope, but I really appreciate Planet of the Apes.
Well, that's a good one.
Despite its lead actor and ending up becoming a crazy gun person who talked to a chair.
Right.
Yeah, I like.
In fact,
Sorry, the thing I love about the Planet of the Apes is how the sequels, which all right, they weren't as successful, but the whole mythology wraps in on itself.
Yes,
It's so weird, but like they're not. The second one is pretty good.
It's pretty all right.
The third one is a movie. The after that it's just weird, but like that it wraps in on itself is just wild.
It's amazing. I've always had a thing. Speaking of Terminator, like I was one of the first things was a kid when I got into Terminator movies that I was like, I just was fascinated with these time paradox things.
Yeah.
Like the fact that Kyle Reese goes back in time to save Sarah Connor and becomes John Connor's father, and like spoiler alert, you know what I mean? But like same thing where wait, if this happened, then that happened, then wait, how does that? It's just something you can't really fully understand, and in a way that's entertaining, so it kind of makes my entertains my mind.
Have you watched I forget what it was called, the Terminator TV series?
Yes.
I loved how as the show went on, no character from the future had the same date for Judgment Day. It just, the timeline was so fucked up with all these time travelers that no one knew what was going on anymore.
And then it ended on a cliffhanger when it was canceled. With John actually going to the future,
right?
Which is crazy. So yeah, it had gotten completely bonkers at that point, but it was an entertaining show. Anyway,
yeah,
I have what I need. So, so in this comic strip, it's called Judgment Day. It's suddenly thousands of years in the future, and a man in a red spacesuit climbs down from his gleaming spaceship and steps foot onto foreign ground. Welcome, Earthman, a crowd cheers. And so this is the planet called Cybrenia. And years before this takes place, humans had placed a small handful of robots on the planet to see how they would develop. The Earthman is named Tarleton. He's arrived to inspect it and decide whether or not this experiment has, have they fostered a society that's ready to be integrated into Earth's human civilization. So it's fantasy because they're actually creating other races of beings that are with the express goal of integrating them into society. Whereas, that wouldn't happen. So they go, throughout the comic, this is not the entirety of it, but like they go through a tour, they look at everything. Everything seems to have been, done okay. Everything's fine. Not only have they mastered innovative engineering, but they have also developed a democratic government. And it's not until the Ardent Orange robot invites the Earthman to inspect the assembly plant where the planet's robot population is created that he notices something is weird. He says, "I see only orange workers. What about the blue robots?" The confused orange robot responds saying that only orange robots are created here. The blue robots are assembled in their own plant on the other side of town. And his guide concludes the explanation of the creation process. They exit, and he asks why the blue plant is located, or where the blue plant was located, and take me there immediately. And he says it's in Blue Town, on the south side of the city. They take a bus. They get there. So he says, why do they differentiate between the blue and the orange robots? And he says, well, because otherwise there'd be trouble. Have to keep them in their place, And Tarleton, increasingly worried, begins to just note how segregated the blue and the orange robots are. You see what's going on here, right?
Yeah.
So, it's not even out of place at the time. There were a lot of kind of morality stories taking place in comics and whatnot. I don't think that part of it so far was super out of the norm.
It's certainly not a story that would sit well with a certain crowd of people up to this point, but there were certainly plenty of these sort of sci-fi stories out there.
Yeah, it only became a problem for the administrator of the Comics Code when that last panel that I hadn't shown yet was revealed. Whenever he gets to that, and it's that is Tarleton.
Oh, they made it woke.
Damn.
You had that one in the chamber, I could tell.
I did, yeah. No, I did. The timing was good, though, wasn't it?
It was good timing.
Yeah, perfect comedic timing, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I can't believe they've forced diversity into this story from the 50s.
And so, the administrator of the code, who was essentially he was the guy with his hand on the lever of power, and I don't remember, some arbitrary method of deciding who that was, but the reason that he decided, or that he cited for this not being okay. First of all, this had already been published, by the way. This was published a few years ago before the code, and this was decided by Gaines to republish it post code. And the administrator's like, no, you just got to change it. And there are a few different accounts of why that was. One of them said something like, what was it?
Did one of them say something like too on the nose?
No, because I don't think
about the robots was one of the excuses they gave.
Oh yeah, that's what it was. So this seems to be the generally accepted one, I guess, accounting, which is that he said something about, because in the code there's a provision about not discriminating against anybody for their beliefs or their religion or whatever, and essentially the robots having this certain view and of their society or whatever constituted that. It's like it's a bullshit excuse. It's because he's black, right?
Right. That's
the reason. He told him he needed to change. Basically, he doesn't need to be a black guy. Make him not a black guy, and it'll be fine. Nobody said what the frame actually is yet. What?
Is there a
visual description for the podcast?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Well, I forget we're not just doing a regular YouTube stream. Thank you, Lucifer. Do you want to be our producer? Well, I can pay you.
I will describe the.
Please do.
So if you're listening on at home, to give a detailed description of what it is it shows inside the spaceship, this astronaut has taken off his helmet and he has not revealed the whole rest of the comic. He has his helmet on and you can't see what his face looks like. And it's inside the spaceship looking out into space. And you can see the stars reflecting on his face as a black man. And just sort of looking into space, thinking about what has just happened. And that's the end of the comic. Thinking on the history of segregation, really.
Yeah. It's probably a sense of irony in his mind.
Right. And yeah, using the religious excuse, boy, that comes up a whole lot of an excuse for segregation and for bigotry is, that's just my religion, as though religion were an immutable quality.
Well, what's remarkable about the story as well is that what we've learned about modern sort of technological advances is that they are accidentally racist. I mean, obviously this is long before the idea of AI and things like that, but we know from recent technological advances that there are problems with
algorithms,
facial recognition software not recognizing black skin, and even like hand dryers that use certain methods not being able to. So yeah, it's.
I mean,
really
like I did
weird.
a video on Westworld season 3, which apparently that was probably the problem of getting the information that I really wanted to talk about was the algorithms, and didn't do too well that video. But part of it that I talked about in that video was that there was an algorithm assigned to a couple of different like probation and parole type systems that were essentially just kind of deciding that these people are more prone to recommit or whatever, and that was used in sentencing, and it had to do with them essentially being black, because they're from a certain part of town or whatever, and people from that part of town tend to commit more crimes or whatever. And it's like there's problems, you know what I mean?
There's a good video by Zoe B, I believe, on YouTube, who talks about in the video facts and feelings, right? And she uses an example of police statistics, right? Where they over-police an area, right, historically.
Uh-huh.
And then when you apply an algorithm to it, it goes, well, this is where we're catching all the criminals, so we're going to police more in there. And then because we're policing there more, we're going to catch more criminals there. So the algorithm we've created is just going to keep pointing us in the same area over and over and over again. Because
that's basically just what they do now already without algorithms, right? Like
but that's what they were doing before. But now they've used the algorithm to say, "Oh, we've done the math," but the math is based on where they started, which was not a point of neutrality.
Which is why we have to focus on systemic issues, and that's I think why the right really doesn't want people to think about. That's why they're like CRT is bad, even though it's not CRT to just say we should look at how systems operate and whether the results are fair or good.
They don't know what CRT is anyways. It's just doing a thing about race, right?
Pretty much mentioning race at all, mentioning any kind of systemic inequality, historic, so on and so forth. And like, how much do you think that this offended the sensibilities of the president or the administrator, because the idea of a black man being the one that they send to do this, right? Like, was that?
I don't want to read his mind, right? I don't know the guy. I don't know anything about him. But I think you come to that conclusion for one of two reasons. A, either you yourself are upset, or you, someone in 1954 in, the sort of the early stages of the civil rights movement, go, this is going to make a segment of people upset at comics.
Yeah.
And I am willing to use my authority to enforce their will.
I mean, but that kind of,
I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong, but like that logic is it had already been published though.
Right.
This was a republish, and so like that kind of maybe, except I guess you could say that maybe there were more eyes on comics at this point. So,
well, sometimes it's the reissue that gets the attention when the original passes by unnoticed by anyone who cares about stopping it as well.
Fair.
I think we as we come up on 3 hours, I think we definitely need to do another episode of just like the censorship in comics, because we didn't have time to go into it, and I think there's so much interesting there and throughout even into the 21st century. I definitely think that
there really is too much to just call it quits on this now, but like, so we're going to do next week too. Fuck it.
I think, Ryan, if you're okay with that, I think we can.
Yeah, that's fine by me. I think we can cover the, the post EC.
Right.
I mean, at least we're on it. We have kind of a timeline going this time, Morgan, whereas last time I think we went all over the place.
We jumped around a fair bit.
But the main thing I want a lot of time to go into is how this, really kind of wrote the unwritten rules for things like, we kind of touched on it, but like this really affected queer representation quite a bit.
Oh yeah, and for the worse.
Yeah.
I do want to also mention the British connection to EC Comics.
Okay.
Go for it.
I don't know if this came up in your research, but the first Tales of the Crypt, Tales from the Crypt, sort of live action production.
The
1972 British horror film.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen it, but I know of it. Yeah.
Well, it was an anthology film by Amicus, who were the big rivals to Hammer Horror at the time, and it basically produces in live action 5 stories from EC Comics, from Vault of Horror, Tales from the Crypt, and The Haunt of Fear.
Nice.
Over the years. So
that is cool. Yeah, I learned that when I was looking into the history of EC for a different purpose at some point, which was basically I was going to talk about Demon Knight, the movie, which it's not like an amazing movie, but I love it anyway. And
so the first Crypt Keeper was actually Ralph Richardson, and
did he look more like the one that we on the comic cover, or more like the one in the show?
Yeah, I mean, definitely not direct, because he's got sort of long white hair in the comic, but he doesn't in the film. It's literally just Ralph Richardson. But yeah, it's quite a good anthology actually. It's very 70s. It's budget wise, it's cheaply made, but good stories, well told, and still got a lot of frights in them. But no, I mean he basically, it's Ralph Richardson in sort of a monk's robe.
Okay. Well, so just I guess we'll do a quick teaser then of what's next week.
Yeah, we'll set it up.
So here's a Superman issue, Action Comics, that was affected, and thereby, kind of crossing over with, the idea of the speculator market and the comics boom of the 90s and stuff like this. This is if you can find the original version of this, hold on to it.
I actually had this comic with the original printing cover, and it was destroyed in a flood.
And if you aren't sure what it is, it's different. It's right here on the cover. So in this one, you've got a father and son, both adult men, and they're having a beer together. Very wholesome moment, actually. But that wasn't allowed.
The comic is actually incredibly moving. It's a very good comic.
But they had to change it?
It's kind of mediocre arc, I'm not going to lie. But this issue was amazing.
Yeah, it kind of looks like... you know whose art that kind of looks like?
Gary.
Is that Gary Frank? Is that... No, okay. Never mind. I thought I was...
I believe it is, yeah. Seeing a different regular Jeff Johns collaborator.
I mean, the line work kind of looks like our Muse's line work.
It is not dissimilar.
just he's got had this weird, back when he drew human beings, before he just said, you know what, I'm going to create this, use this frog thing that I can draw however I want, and then nobody can hold me to any standards.
Right.
His humans were a little weird, but
yeah.
Anyway, so there's that, and just to wrap up Bill Gaines, the story about the meta story of Judgment Day, right? How that all resolved. Like I said, it was the last comic book that EC ever published. They were, pretty much just kind of had to. They were death by 1,000 cuts in a pretty short amount of time.
Yeah.
And we looked at why that is, because it was intentionally designed as such. So, but Bill Gaines, he fucking stood his ground to the administrator. Said, no, we need to publish it as is. The administrator said, no, you can change this and this and this. Gave him all kinds of little adjustments he could make, which essentially, all resulted in can't be a black guy.
Yep.
And Bill Gaines stood his ground, and he won. So this guy, he went through a lot of shit in a short amount of time. He took a lot of heat nationally. He was basically painted as some sicko who wanted kids to, read murder stories or whatever. And that sucks, because he seemed like an awesome guy, but he won in that one instance.
And I love he won in that instance.
Yep.
And
but
it's a
although they did not
hell of a story to go out on.
You're
right?
you're kind of roboting.
They went on to change. Am I roboting?
Yeah.
I've been replaced by the Cylons. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, cool. They one of the fun hypocrisies of this. Were you going to get into this, Dane, or can I take this one?
I'm not
about
sure.
EC and publishing formats.
Oh, I mean, yeah. If I figured that would be where we go next week, but yeah, I was going to talk about Mad. So yeah, go ahead, take it.
All right. Well, we'll lead in with Mad. Do you want to lead in with Mad next week, or want to do that now?
I mean, it's really up to. I mean, I'm just thinking in terms of Ryan at this point, because I know it's like 3 a.m. or something for him.
I will finish on this because it doesn't take long. So EC Publications, EC Comics goes away, but they get to keep publishing some weird, occasionally strange stories in a little magazine, which is not a comic book. Mad Magazine.
Yep, and that's one of the ways that, and we'll get into more next week, but there's a few ways that comics got around the code, just through technicalities, which are often really fun ways to subvert, shitty rules. And one of them was the, magazine. So like, for instance, Marvel was publishing, the Deadly Hands of Kung Fu and, stuff like that in kind of really the difference between the two is size. That's it. Like,
right.
You
it's just the size
put
and
certain things in a comic book, but if you change the dimensions of the thing a little bit, just a little bit, it's okay.
Magazine.
Made no sense.
Nope, but we can get into that more next week. Little teaser for you.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a outro video playing here, or uploaded rather.
All right,
you know what?
Ryan, do you have anything to add? Or are you getting pretty tired over there?
I'm okay at the moment, but yeah, so glad it's coming to an end for my sleep sake. But yeah, no, I don't think I've got anything to add at this point. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see where this goes, because the build up to it is definitely in the wheelhouse of a forced moral panic.
Yep. And that's true as well, Greg. We can look at Marvel's first original graphic novel, God Loves, Man Kills, and they definitely use that opportunity to put some dicey stuff in there.
And it gives me a chance to research why British comics are a different size, because I don't think it's for the same reason, but I don't know what the reason is.
So yeah, on the way out the door
about British comics is that the Marvel UK Transformer stories were better than the US Marvel Transformer stories.
That is true. But also, yeah, it's weird that the British Marvel was not just reprinting the American stories.
Yeah.
They had their
You know,
own
one of the
stories.
first characters that, like, before I really got into superhero comics for Marvel, one of the first characters, and I still love the design of them, that was like, wow, that's fucking cool, was Death's Head 2. And I had to rebuy the first issue of that a few years ago just to say I owned it again. But Death's Head 2 from Marvel UK was, I don't know, something about the look of them when I was a kid was cool. So gonna have a 2-minute, huh?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I don't want to end it before everybody says what they want to say. But go ahead.
Oh, well.
Did you just call us nerds?
I did. You're a bunch of nerds. If you are listening to this right now, or worse, if you're a co-host on this podcast, you're a big fucking nerd. And you should know it.
It's true. Well, you know, and hopefully there's no kids watching, by the way, because...
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
There's way too long of a gap at the start of that. I need to cut that and make it more timely. Death's Head 1 showed up in Doctor Who comics? What?
Yeah, I think Marvel was printing the Doctor Who comics, and they may have been printing the American ones as well. I've definitely had a copy, a Marvel Doctor Who with Tom Baker era.
I mean, they basically had the license to everything at one point, mostly in the 80s and 70s and 80s. But
Today I learned there was a Doctor Who comic.
It makes sense.
I was this minute old.
Yeah, next week.
Sorry, I was just going to say.
Next week, you can go ahead, Matt. I need to get water.
I was just going to say, I think the Tom Baker era was the first to be shown on US television, the first era on PBS.
Right.
So, yeah, I think Marvel did a tie-in comic. But then, obviously, we had our own Doctor Who comics over here.
Marvel didn't really, you know, hit the licensing peak until they were doing ALF and Police Academy, though.
What the fuck?
I mean, I've talked about before that Police Academy comic was pretty much the first comic that I remember reading.
Right.
It's based on the cartoon at the time. But anyway, next week we're going to be looking at LGBTQ, lack of representation. And then, you know, now that we're going to have plenty of time, let's talk about, how representation now and actually maybe give some recommendations. If anybody wants to think of some of those, look some up. We'll talk about it.
I have a spicy take I will save on that for next week.
Please, we need spicy takes for next week.
All right.
And then sorry. We'll talk about drugs. That's another thing. We're gonna talk about
drugs, sex, maybe some rock and roll. Rock and roll will be a different episode.
Rock and roll is a different episode. A couple of them probably, but yeah.
Probably.
So I've got a 2-minute clip here of it's going to be Bill Gaines talking some more because never get enough of that. And then I'm not sure what the other guy's name is. I should have verified that before I uploaded the clip, but he clearly, based on what he's saying, he was another creator at EC Comics. But yeah, see you on Wednesday for the initiative stream, and maybe sometime before then if I get bored and want to stream. Thanks everybody. Please hit subscribe and the like and all that.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Yes, do the like and subscribe thing. Subscribe to Dane's Patreon.
Yeah, I do have a Patreon. I should fucking remember.
You should remember to
Patreon.com/actualfandom. It does really benefit. Obviously, help me out. I hate asking for it, but it's nice. I appreciate the 16 or so folks that support me now. Thank you guys. Thank you. Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Ryan.
Give Dane comics money. Thank you, Dane.
Destroying Horror Comics, when we came out with R3, very quickly, I think there were 130. Of course, they didn't have the art and they didn't have the stories. But in all honesty, I can't say they were gorier than we were because we figured we could out-gore anybody, and we did.
Guy murders his wife and eats her, so he can get rid of the evidence. What should we do with it? So, we come up with some crazy gimmick with a snap ending. We always love to have shock endings and surprise things. Much like the kind of thing that Twilight Zone had afterwards and Alfred Hitchcock. We did get grosser and grosser. There was no question about it. But we were doing tongue-in-cheek, horror stories. And they were starting to say things like, hey, you know, this is ruining our kids, and they're going to become ghouls, vampires, and murderers, which is a lot of nonsense.